Chapter 578. Brother Luo, for you to personally come here, I am also very happy. The utmost North Sage Emperor Zhongfan stood up and said to the Azura God King with a smile on his face. The Blood Demon Queen smiled charmingly. A while ago, when I went to the Azura Sea to find Brother Luo, the people of the Azura Sea used the excuse that Brother Luo was carefully teaching your last disciple to obstruct me. Never would I have expected that Brother Luo would have the time today. The resentment in the Blood Demon Queen's voice was something that practically everyone in the palace hall was able to hear. The Azura God King smiled indifferently. You Cha, I am indeed teaching my disciple. Then, has that disciple come today? The Blood Demon King Yu Cha immediately asked. At this moment, the Azura God King walked to his seat and sat down. Only then did he say, "He's here. He's right behind me." As he said that, he looked at Ho Fei, who was behind him. Immediately, everyone in the palace hall looked to Ho Fei. Fei has become the Azura God King's disciple. Qin Yu felt a burst of joy in his heart. Ho Fei and Qin Yu glanced at each other. They did not say anything. The two brothers knew what the other was thinking with a single glance. At this moment, it was also inconvenient for the two of them to talk in the palace hall. Thus, Qin Yu and Ho Fei both decided to reminisce about the past after leaving the palace hall. Junior Ho Fei pays his respects to the various god kings. Ho Fei said courteously, "Haha." A hearty laughter sounded. The utmost West Sage Emperor spoke. Brother Luo does not like to take in disciples. This is something that we all know. May I know why you've taken in a disciple this time? Could it be that this youngster by the name of Ho Fei possesses something special? The Azura God King smiled indifferently. Today is the day that the utmost North Sage Emperor is looking for a groom for his daughter. There is no need for everyone to come and talk about my disciple. Although the Azura God King spoke in a very amiable manner, the 8 great sage emperors who knew him very well all knew that the Azura God King was already somewhat unhappy. The 8 great sage emperors and the representatives of the 3 great Ascenda powers all took their seats. Everyone. The utmost North Sage Emperor Zhongfan stood up. He had a smile on his face. Today is the day of my daughter's public groom search. In these years, there have been a lot of people that wanted to participate in the groom search. However, after the basic screening, only 18 of the Divine Realm's elites remained. As the utmost North Sage Emperor said that, he pointed to Qin Yu and them. There were a total of 18 people in this row. Quen Ho, Shen Tufan, Qin Yu, Zhou Xian, Duanmu Yu, and the others were at the very front. The God Kings above all nodded and smiled at the 18 candidates below. Many of the people below were related to the God Kings above. Not only Qin Yu's group of 5, but the other 13 people who had passed the basic screening also had high status. The weakest among them was at least at the level of a prince. Brother Zhang, aren't there 18 candidates? It's impossible for your precious daughter to be married off to 18 people. There has to be a fair selection method. Otherwise we won't agree to it. The Thunder Punishment City's Northwest Sage Emperor, Zhou Hua, said with a chuckle. I agree with what Brother Zhou said. Out of the 18 people, 17 should be eliminated. This method of elimination must convince all of us, the Light Lens City's utmost South Sage Emperor said. Immediately, the 8 great Sage Emperors, the Blood Demon Queen, the Floating Mist God King and them all started to chat with smiles. The atmosphere was very harmonious. As for the people below, they were all listening to these God Kings chatting and laughing. Everyone please rest assured. Zhongfan was smiling so much that his face was slightly red. I naturally have a fair selection method. In fact, these 18 elites are all extremely outstanding. I am unwilling to eliminate any one of them. Haha, merely my daughter can only have a single husband. Zhongfan looked to Zhongli beside him with a smile. Many of the people below all looked to Zhongli. Zhongli was the main character of this groom search. As for the specific selection method, I'll have my wife explain it to everyone. Of course, this method will definitely satisfy everyone. Zhongfan said with a smile. He then sat back down. As for Zhang Fan's wife Chun Yu Ro, she stood up. Qin Yu Zhou Xian Quen Ho Shun Tu Fan. And them all looked to Chun Yu Ro. They all wanted to hear exactly what this selection method was. Everyone. Chun Yu Ro had an amiable expression. I believe that my son-in-law must be sincere and sincere toward my daughter. In ordinary life, he must be concerned for my daughter and must also be diligent. Furthermore, he must also possess sufficient status and strength to match up to my daughter. Everyone, do you all agree with what I have said? People below all nodded. Merely, they all had a tacit understanding to not disturb her. Chun Yu Ro continued. In view of what I have said earlier about sincerity, concern and attentiveness, as well as sufficient strength and status. Using these points, my husband and I have formulated such a selection method. Chun Yu Ro extended 3 fingers. 3 gifts, 3 chosen candidates. The people below were all startled. After that, they all started to guess what the selection method that Chun Yu Ro spoke of was. Qin Yu also had his own guesses in his heart. 3 gifts, 3 quotas. You want us to present gifts and then determine the chosen candidates. The thoughts of the people below were more or less the same as Qin Yu's. I will explain the selection method in detail, Chun Yu Ro said with a smile. In order to test who among the 18 people is the most sincere toward my daughter, we have set up the selection method. We've set up a method to select the first person. Each of the 18 people will take out a gift that represents their sincerity. Sincerity and sincere intentions. How is this to be determined by a single gift? The floating mist god king said in a low voice. The people below also nodded in their hearts. There were differences in the value of gifts. However, how was one to determine who was the most sincere? If people with different statuses were to present the same gift, then the gift would appear to be the same. However, could it be determined that the 2 of them were equally sincere? Zhang Fan stood up from the side. He said with a smile. Everyone, there is no need to be anxious. I will explain it in detail later. I will definitely make everyone feel that it is fair. Qin Yu nodded in his heart. The other 7 great sage emperors and the representatives of the 3 Ascenda powers were all present. This Zhang Fan would definitely not make a joke out of himself. Chun Yu Ro continued. Whoever's gift is judged to be the most sincere, then he will be the first person to be selected. Zhang Fan also spoke. As for the people who will judge the gifts, it will be the 13 god kings present, including me. What do you all think? Qin Yu slightly nodded. Of the 13 god kings present, other than the 3 from the utmost northern region's floating snow city, the other 10 came from different powers. Their statuses were also very high. With them judging the gifts, there was absolutely no need to worry about any problems. None of the people below had any objections to this. The second gift will also determine the second person to be selected. This gift will test everyone's attentiveness. This gift will not be judged by its value. Instead, it will be judged by its novelty, strangeness and various other aspects. It will also be judged by the 13 god kings. The candidate who presented the gift with the most attentiveness would be selected. Chun Yu Ro continued. As for the third gift, it will be judged by the candidate's strength and status. This gift will be judged by how precious it is. Whoever's gift is the most precious will be the third person to be selected. Hearing the method of judging the second and third person to be selected, practically everyone below heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. A test of who was the most attentiveness. This gave those people with low status and strength hope. A test of who had the most precious gift. This also gave Zhou Xian and them sufficient confidence. Clearly, there was hope for everyone. Zhang Fan said with a clear voice. After these 3 people have been decided, these 3 candidates will have to present their betrothal gifts. My wife and I will choose according to the various aspects of the 3 candidates. Whoever we choose, we will accept a betrothal gift from them. As for the betrothal gifts from the others, we will return them. Everyone came to a realization. Even if 3 people were chosen, the final candidate would still be decided by Jiang Fan and his wife. Zhou Xian suddenly stood up. Uncle, there is a matter that I do not understand. The 3 gifts will determine the 3 people to be selected. If a certain person's 3 gifts are all the most sincere, most attentiveness and most precious, then what about them? What should we do then? Jiang Fan started laughing. Haha, that's a very good question. If a certain outstanding person below were to receive 3 gifts that are respectively the most sincere, most attentiveness and most precious, then he would only be selected. Then he'll be the only one selected. At that time my wife and I won't have to choose. That person would directly become my daughter's husband. The people below immediately started to discuss among themselves. Qin Yu had already completely understood the method of selection. The selection was divided into 3 rounds. In each round, everyone would display their gifts. One person would be determined by the gifts. After the 3 rounds, the 3 people were decided. If it is possible, I must obtain all 3 people. Qin Yu thought in his heart. Qin Yu did not wish for any accidents to happen. He merely wanted to marry Li Er in an even more secure manner. Brother Jiang, for the most attentiveness, we can determine it according to the novelty of the gift. As for the most precious gift, there is no need to mention it. As for the most sincere gift, how would we determine it? The utmost East Sage Emperor Huangfuyu said with a smile on his face. Jiang Fan smiled and nodded. This is what I am going to explain in detail. We will determine who is the most sincere according to their gifts. This round appears to have a single person. However, in reality this person might be wasted. Qin Yu, Zhou Xian and them all pricked up their ears. They were afraid that they would miss a single word. Wasted. How could the person be wasted? Qin Yu was unable to understand. Who is the most sincere? My wife and I have decided to let the exalted celestials decide. Jiang Fan's face started to shine. Exalted celestials. Those god kings all looked to Jiang Fan in amazement. Everyone, do not be surprised. This round is for the 18 candidates to proceed to the Mountain Sea Palace. If anyone is able to move the exalted celestials and obtain their gifts, then that person would be sincere. If only a single person were to obtain the exalted celestials' gifts, then that person would directly obtain the chosen spot. If 2 people were to obtain the exalted celestials' gifts, then we 13 god kings would determine the quality of the 2 gifts. Then we would determine who would be chosen. Jiang Fan said with a smile. Everyone understood what he meant. Go to the Mountain Sea Palace and attempt to obtain the exalted celestials' gifts. How could it be that easy to meet the exalted celestials? After all, they were legendary characters. It was very possible that no one would be able to obtain a gift. This would also cause the chosen spot to be wasted. Merely. That thunder punishment exalted celestial is from the Zhou clan, right? Qin Yu frowned. He took a glance at Zhou Xian beside him. At this moment, Zhou Xian had a joyous expression. Chapter 579. After the selection method was decided, everyone in the hall began to discuss with each other. You want to go to the Mountain Sea Palace to obtain the gift bestowed by the exalted celestial? Duanmu Yu lightly smiled as he shook his head. Then he raised his cup and drank all of the wine in it. Brother Duanmu, Qin Yu asked, do the celestials often show up in the Mountain Sea Palace? Qin Yu didn't know much about the Mountain Sea Palace. Duanmu Yu smiled, shook his head and said, no, the 3 great exalted celestials are legendary characters. They are extremely difficult to meet. As for the Mountain Sea Palace, it was the only palace that the 3 Empyreans had made public. Of course, the chances of the 3 exalted celestials appearing in the Mountain Sea Palace are very low. However, once we get there, the 3 exalted celestials will definitely know. Qin Yu also understood this point. The Mountain Sea Palace was equivalent to the residence of the 3 celestial venerables. Other people had already arrived at the three Empyreans' residences. How could the three Empyreans not know? I'm sure the three Celestials know everything we do in the Mountain Sea Palace. If we can get a gift from them, then we'll have succeeded. Qin Ho also spoke. Then he looked at Zhou Xian with a smile. Brother Zhou, the fight for the first spot is very advantageous to you. Qin Ho had lived in the divine world for a very long time. He knew a lot more than Qin knew. Qin Ho naturally knew of Empyrean Thunder Punishment's identity. It's hard to say. Once one becomes an Empyrean, their temperament is not something that we can predict. It is also very difficult to determine whether or not I will be able to obtain a gift, Zhou Xian said modestly. Come, let's not talk about that. At any rate, there are a total of 3 spots. In the future, everyone will just have to work hard to compete for it. Now let's drink, Qin Ho said with a laugh. In the floating cloud mansion, the 3 brothers, Qin Yu, Ho Fei, and Kuro, were gathered together. After the banquet ended, Qin Yu used his divine sense to ask Uncle Lon to send Kuro back. This allowed Qin Yu and his 2 brothers to reunite. Your rate of cultivation is very fast. I am the slowest one, Kuro deliberately said with a frown. At this moment, Qin Yu was a high-level heavenly deity. Ho Fei was also a high-level heavenly deity. Only Kuro was a mid-level heavenly deity. I know about Xiao Hei's cultivation speed. Xiao Hei, you've stayed in the wood mansion for about 6,000 years. In the 3rd layer space of the Jianglan's realm, you've only spent 6 million years. From a low-level heavenly deity to a peak mid-level heavenly deity in 6 million years, this speed is already very fast. Qin Yu nodded and said, But Fei, your cultivation speed. Qin Yu looked at Ho Fei. Kuro's cultivation method was very unique. He could actually comprehend the laws of time. Qin Yu's avatar was constantly comprehending the spatial insights left behind by the God King of Life, so it was normal for his speed to be fast. But what about Ho Fei? It had only been close to 10,000 years since they parted in Yuqi City. Ho Fei was actually already a high-level heavenly deity. His cultivation speed was truly astonishing. Haha, speaking of this, I am also a bit confused. Ho Fei rubbed his head. At the beginning, I was brought away by my monkey clan's senior. However, what happened after I arrived at the Azura Sea? In less than a year, that Azura God King came over and said that he wanted to take me as his disciple. My monkey clan senior was extremely willing to hand me over to the Azura God King. Qin Yu and Kuro were carefully listening. As Ho Fei spoke till this point, he blinked his eyes. Then that Azura God King directly set up a space and accelerated the time within the space by 10,000 times. 10,000 years inside the space was equivalent to a single year outside. Although I seem to have only cultivated for close to 10,000 years, I have actually cultivated for close to 100 million years. In these close to 100 million years, it was the Azura God King who personally guided me the entire time. Qin Yu and Kuro glanced at each other. They couldn't help but sigh at Ho Fei's good luck. Qin Yu suddenly grew confused. That's not right. Qin Yu frowned and said, Fei, as far as I know, if one were to set up a space with a difference in time, then that space would be very unstable and easily collapse. It would be very difficult to stabilize that space. The greater the difference in time ratio, the harder it would be to stabilize it. Qin Yu looked to Ho Fei. Earlier, I heard you say that the Azura God King directly set up a space and did not rely on a spatial divine artifact, right? That's right, he directly set up a space. I'm certain. Ho Fei nodded firmly. Maintaining a space with a time ratio of 10,000 times for 10,000 years. This is truly unbelievable. Qin Yu was in a bit of disbelief. Uncle Lon, when he refined the Jianglan's realm at the very most, he had only increased the time ratio to 1,000 times. As expected of the number 1 God King, Qin Yu sighed in his heart. This Azura God King was indeed abnormal. Kuro suddenly said, Hey monkey, I'm curious, why would that Azura God King want you to be his disciple for no reason at all? Why would he continue to maintain a space with a time ratio of 10,000 times for 10,000 years? What is he trying to achieve? Hearing what Kuro said, Qin Yu was also confused. What was this Azura God King trying to achieve? I'm also confused. I've also asked the Azura God King, that is, my master. Ho Fei seemed to not be used to calling the Azura God King master. Then how did the Azura God King answer you? Qin Yu immediately asked. A trace of confusion appeared in Ho Fei's eyes. At that time, the Azura God King did not say much. He merely said, he was entrusted by someone. Qin Yu and Kuro looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with confusion. Entrusted by someone. Someone wanted the Azura God King to help teach Ho Fei. Who was this person? In the entire divine realm, how many people were qualified to have the Azura God King help them? Furthermore, the Azura God King was willing to maintain a space for 10,000 years. A person like the Azura God King should disdain to lie. And who was the person who dragged him along? I reckon that this secret can only be found by Fei himself. Qin Yu looked at Ho Fei with a smile. Ho Fei said helplessly, I also know. The Azura God King said that when I reach the God King realm, he will tell me. Is so troublesome? God King realm, what does he think it is? Is it that easy to reach? Monkey, let's not talk about this anymore. Tomorrow, Big Brother will be leaving for the Mountain Sea Palace. Kuro looked at Qin Yu with a smile. Big Brother, only 18 people are going to the Mountain Sea Palace. We can't accompany you. Only the 18 people participating in the groom search were going to the Mountain Sea Palace. No one else was allowed to disturb them. Mountain Sea Palace. Qin Yu said in a low voice. This first chosen candidate spot, no matter what, I will do my best to obtain it. In this groom search, Qin Yu was determined to win and not lose. After passing through the conveying array below the utmost northern region's floating snow city, Qin Yu and them were directly teleported to the northernmost conveying array of the Divine Realms continent. A group of people were gathered on the north coast. Further north was the boundless ocean. Not far away, one could hear the sound of waves lapping against the shore. The utmost North Sage Emperor Jiang Fan said to the 18 competitors in a clear voice. Everyone, for every round of competition, everyone will be given 10 years to prepare. After 10 years, I and the other God Kings will be waiting for everyone in the floating snow city. If anyone is late, then it would mean that they have forfeited this round of competition. There was no conveying array from here to the Mountain Sea Palace. In order to go there, one could only fly. Merely flying back and forth would take several months. On top of that, trying one's luck in the Mountain Sea Palace would also require a sufficient amount of time. 10 years was not a long period of time. Is everyone ready? The utmost North Sage Emperor had a smile on his face. In that case, everyone, we can set off now. Remember this, you must return to the floating snow city 10 years from today. You can arrive early, but you cannot be late. Your Majesty Sage Emperor, farewell. The group of people all bowed to the utmost North Sage Emperor. After that, they all stepped onto their weapons and rapidly flew toward the north. As for Qin Yu, he stepped onto the divine spear waning snow. The divine spear waning snow was something that even God Kings would find hard to determine from its appearance how powerful it was. Dark and yellow energy. I reckon that even God Kings have never seen it before. Qin Yu thought in his heart. If one had never seen the dark and yellow energy before, how would one know the frightening might of the dark and yellow energy after it was infused into a weapon? Stepping on the divine spear waning snow, Qin Yu's flying speed was extremely fast. As for Duanmu Yu, he was the only person who was flying side by side with Qin Yu. The rest of the people were all lagging behind. Below them was a boundless ocean with surging waves. Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu were chatting and laughing as they rapidly flew toward the Mountain Sea Palace. In the blink of an eye, nearly 2 months had passed. After interacting with each other for nearly 2 months, the relationship between Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu had improved greatly. Brother Qin Yu, you must not have too much hope in this round of competition. That Zhou Xian's superiority is too obvious. The greater your hope, the greater your disappointment, Duan Muyu said to Qin Yu with a smile. Qin Yu kept having the feeling that regardless of what Duan Muyu said or did, he did not seem to care too much. He did not care about failure. He also did not care about success. It was as if there was nothing that could cause him to be angry or shocked. Brother Duanmu, I wish to ask you this. If you were unable to obtain any of the 3 chosen spots, what would you have done? Qin Yu looked to Duanmu. Duanmu smiled indifferently. Why are you asking this question? If I fail, then I fail. What's so amazing about that? Furthermore, is failure always a failure? To be able to comprehend some experience from failure could also be considered a success. Thus, failure and success are not absolute. Qin Yu was unable to refrain himself from shaking his head and smiling helplessly. Why are you pursuing Li Er? Qin Yu asked. Duanmu was silent for a moment. Then he said, to seek a breakthrough. I hope that I can reach the God King level. Qin Yu felt a burst of depression in his heart. Sure enough, of the participants of the groom search, even this Duanmu that Qin Yu felt to be very good, was only pursuing Li Er for the sake of becoming a God King. Brother Qin Yu, we've arrived at the Mountain Sea Palace, Duanmu suddenly said. Qin Yu looked ahead. He saw numerous islands gathered together in picturesque disorder. There were a lot of islands surrounding the Mountain Sea Palace. They were known as the 1,000 Islands. However, the actual number of islands was over 3,000. Qin Yu and Duanmu streaked across the sky like 2 rays of light. They flew directly toward the central island of the 3,000+ islands. The Mountain Sea Palace was located on that island. Chapter 580. Looking down from the sky, the 3,000 islands that were gathered together were like cobblestones. As for the largest island in the center, the floating island, it was a pearl among the thousands of cobblestones. A resplendent light shone out from the center of the floating island. After landing on the floating island and seeing the Mountain Sea Palace in the distance, Qin Yu's eyes started to shine. He gasped in admiration. As expected of the temporary residents of the 3 great exalted celestials. Although it cannot be considered luxurious, its grandeur is something that even the sage emperor's palace cannot compare to. The Mountain Sea Palace was nearly 10 meters taller than the floating island. It was all because of the stairs. At a glance, one could see that the simple and unadorned stairs continued upward, all the way to the main hall of the Mountain Sea Palace. On top of the stairs, in the open space before the main hall, there was a middle-aged man and a middle-aged woman. They were slowly sweeping the ground. Brother Qin Yu, in terms of grandeur, this Mountain Sea Palace is a palace that was personally refined by the 3 great exalted celestials. How could its grandeur be weak? Do you see those stairs? Duanmu lightly smiled as he extended his slender finger and pointed to the distant stairs. What was so special about those stairs? Qin Yu carefully inspected the stairs. There were a total of 99 flights of stairs. Each flight of stairs was a simple and unadorned brownish-black color. Images of grass, wood and other things were carved onto the surface of the stairs. The more he looked, the more Qin Yu felt that those stairs were special. However, Qin Yu was unable to discover the secret of those stairs. Seeing Qin Yu's frowning and pondering expression, Duanmu said with a smile, Brother Qin Yu, those stairs are the legendary Mountain Sea Palace's heaven-connecting flight of steps. Heaven-connecting flight of steps. Why are those stairs called heaven-connecting flight of steps? Qin Yu asked in confusion. Although Qin Yu had been in the divine realm for a period of time, he had spent the majority of his time training. Thus, he only knew some general things about the divine realm. As for some of the more detailed secrets, Qin Yu did not know about them. Duanmu said with a smile. The utmost North Sage Emperor told us to move the exalted celestials with our sincerity. How do we move them? I can only think of one way, and that is to make use of the heaven ascending steps. Qin Yu had always wondered how to move the celestial venerables. And now, after hearing what Duanmu said, he asked, Borrow the power of the heaven-reaching flight of steps? Oh. I know of a legend. According to the legend, as long as one is not a god king, one is able to ascend the 99 steps of the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Then, the exalted celestial will definitely appear to meet that person. Duanmu Yu revealed the mystery. Qin Yu looked at the ancient stairs in the distance in surprise. The flight of stairs was 10 meters wide and had 99 steps. Brother Duanmu, is there something special about these steps? Even high-level heavenly deities are unable to ascend. Qin Yu felt a bit of disbelief. What was so special about stairs? In all of history, there has never been a single expert that has not reached the God King level that was able to climb to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps step by step. Duanmu Yu continued to speak with a resounding voice. At this moment, a man and a woman who were sweeping the floor at the top of the stairs took a step forward and flew directly in front of Qin Yu. Brother Duanmu, long time no see, that middle-aged man said to Duanmu Yu with a smile. Qin Yu saw Duanmu Yu and the middle-aged man's expression, and immediately knew that the two of them were old acquaintances. At this moment Duanmu Yu also said, "It has indeed been a long time. Has been a total of 8 million years since we last met." Oh, that's right, Hao Jun, as the disciple of the unfettered exalted celestial. Have you ever seen the unfettered exalted celestial in these 8 million years? At the same time, Duanmu Yu said to Qin Yu, "Brother Qin Yu, these two people are respectively the disciple of the unfettered exalted celestial, Hao Jun, and the disciple of the thunder punishment exalted celestial, Yao Lin." Qin Yu pays his respects to Hao Jun and Yao Lin. Qin Yu slightly bowed and said, with Qin Yu's current eyesight, he was able to tell that the two people before him were both high-level heavenly deities. That Hao Jun lightly smiled at Qin Yu. Then, with a helpless smile, he replied to Duanmu Yu, "Brother Duanmu, the exalted celestial is someone who is free and unfettered. Ever since I became the disciple of the exalted celestial, he had only guided me in my cultivation for a short period of time. Later on, he decided to leave me to fend for myself. Ever since the last time you left in these 8 million years, I have not seen the exalted celestial even once." As Hao Jun said those words, he looked to the beautiful middle-aged woman beside him. "This Yao Lin's luck is a bit better than mine. She even managed to see the thunder punishment exalted celestial once a few years ago." Duanmu Yu smiled to Qin Yu beside him and said, "Brother Qin Yu, did you hear that? Even the disciples of these two exalted celestials rarely manage to see the exalted celestials. For us to be able to see the exalted celestials and obtain their gifts, it will be extremely difficult." Qin Yu had no choice but to admit it. It was true that the first chosen candidate spot set by the utmost North Sage Emperor might be wasted. Qin Yu's spatial energy began to spread out. It had been a total of 6,000 years since he reached the universe realm. Qin Yu's current spatial energy covered a range of 100 miles. Although it cannot completely cover the sky-floating island, covering the sky-floating island's mountain sea palace is very simple. Qin Yu began to carefully inspect the mountain sea palace. Before inspecting it, he was still curious. However, upon inspecting it, Qin Yu discovered that there was nothing mysterious about the mountain sea palace. It was merely a palace with a rather complicated structure. Furthermore, there was not a single person in the entire mountain sea palace. "Hao Jun, Yao Lin," Qin Yu said to the two of them with a smile. "The two of you are the disciple of the unfettered exalted celestial and the disciple of the thunder punishment exalted celestial. Then, what about the floating feathers exalted celestial? Does he have any disciples?" Hao Jun and Yao Lin glanced at each other. Then they both laughed. Duanmu Yu said to Qin Yu, "Qin Yu, you know too little about the floating feathers exalted celestial. The floating feathers exalted celestial is the most mysterious and the hardest to meet among the 3 great exalted celestials. Not to mention you, even the 8 great sage emperors have likely met the floating feathers exalted celestial very few times. The two of us have become disciples of the 2 exalted celestials. In all these years, we have only met the floating feathers exalted celestial once. Furthermore, the floating feathers exalted celestial possesses an extremely strange temperament. He has never had any disciples, Yao Lin said with a smile. Hao Jun said in a low voice. The floating feathers exalted celestial is extremely powerful. The other two exalted celestials would frequently have conflicts with each other. However, they have never dared to have conflicts with the floating feathers exalted celestial. From the words of these two exalted celestials, Qin Yu felt even more clearly how mysterious the floating feathers exalted celestial was. The reason why Hao Jun and Yao Lin were able to tell Qin Yu so much was because they were giving face to Duanmu Yu. Hao Jun, I wish to meet the exalted celestials this time around to obtain a bestowment from them. Do you know of any good methods? Duanmu Yu asked. Hao Jun blinked his eyes and smiled. Brother Duanmu, it is very easy to meet the exalted celestials. All you need to do is to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps from below. I naturally know of that. Merely, in order to ascend the 99 steps, one must reach the God King level. Otherwise, how could one possibly reach the top? Duanmu Yu said while shaking his head. Hao Jun and Yao Lin glanced at each other. A trace of a smile was present in their eyes. Brother Duanmu, I know why you all have come here. The utmost North Sage Emperor has already informed me of this matter beforehand. Who can I not side with? Furthermore, there is nothing I can do even if I wanted to. In order to meet the exalted celestials, the only way is to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps, Hao Jun said with a mischievous smile. Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu felt helpless upon hearing that. It turned out that they had already received the news. We need to obtain a gift bestowed by the exalted celestials. Qin Yu muttered. Ascending the heaven-reaching flight of steps was a method that had no other choice. In the past few days, Qin Yu had been on the levitation island the entire time. In fact, in the Mountain Sea Palace, apart from the main palace hall, there were also 3 side palaces. The 3 side palaces corresponded to the palaces of the Unfettered Exalted Celestial, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial, and the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial respectively. There was nothing special about the flight of steps leading to the 3 side palaces. Qin Yu had also strolled around the 3 side palaces for a long time. However, in the completely empty Mountain Sea Palace, other than himself, there were only 2 exalted celestials' disciples and Duanmu Yu. Evidently, Duanmu Yu had not made any breakthroughs. It would appear that I will truly have to attempt that heaven-reaching flight of steps, Qin Yu muttered as he sat on a large blue stone. Brother Qin Yu. Qin Yu raised his head to look. Duanmu Yu was currently walking over with a frown on his face. Brother Qin Yu, Queen Ho has arrived. Queen Ho has arrived. Qin Yu suddenly jumped down from the blue stone. Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu's flying speed was the fastest. They were only able to arrive 1 or 2 months ahead of ordinary people. However, Queen Ho, who was second only to Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu, had already arrived on the levitation island. We cannot waste any more time. In the past few days, we have not been able to find any other method. We can only use this stupid method. Duanmu Yu had a serious expression on his face as he spoke to Qin Yu solemnly. Qin Yu nodded slightly. Come, let's go to the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu began to walk toward the Mountain Sea Palace's heaven-reaching flight of steps with large strides. However, after Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu walked for a short while, they discovered Queen Ho, who was not far away from the heaven-reaching flight of steps. When Queen Ho saw that Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu were actually walking toward the heaven-reaching flight of steps, he opened his eyes wide in shock. Brother Qin Yu, Brother Duanmu, have the 2 of you lost your minds? Those are the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Only God King level experts are capable of ascending those steps. Although it is said that, if a non-godly king level expert ascends the heaven-reaching flight of steps, the exalted celestials will appear to meet them, it is still hard to determine whether or not that legend is true. Furthermore, as long as one has not reached the God King level, it is impossible for one to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps, Queen Ho said directly to Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu. Qin Yu was unable to refrain himself from stopping. Was it absolutely impossible? Qin Yu looked to Quen Ho. At this moment, Duanmu Yu also looked to Quen Ho. Quen Ho, there is no need for you to try to persuade them. Furthermore, that legend is true. If you do not believe me, you can ask Hao Jun and Yao Lin. They are disciples of the exalted celestials. They know this the best. Even if it is true, so what? Quen Ho refuted. The utmost North Sage Emperor had also said to me that unless one completely comprehended the spatial laws, it would be impossible for one to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Ha ha! A loud laughter was heard. Zhou Xian, who was standing on a golden heavy sword, soared into the sky. His cyan gown fluttered in the wind. The current Zhou Xian was emitting a domineering aura. Brother Qin Yu, Brother Duanmu, what are the two of you doing in front of the heaven-reaching flight of steps? Could it be that you're seeking trouble for yourselves? Haha, my imperial father had already said that those who are not god-kings would definitely not be able to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Right after Zhou Xian finished saying those words, he had already descended. Qin Yu looked to the distance. He saw people flying over one after another. There were actually 6 of them. These 6 people were all high-level heavenly deities. Among them was the bashful youngster, Shen Tufan. Those 6 people also descended. Brother Quain, what are you all arguing about? A robust youngster landed and asked with a clear voice. Oh, Heavenly Wolf Palace Master, we are not arguing about anything. Merely, Brother Duanmu and Brother Qin Yu are planning to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps. Quen Ho said with a smile. Immediately, that Heavenly Wolf Palace Master looked to Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu with an extremely shocked expression. Qin Yu started to frown. Why did it seem like this group of people were watching clowns? Brother Qin Yu, there is no need for you to mind them. Duanmu Yu's expression was calm. He did not care about the gazes of the others at all. Brother Quain, I have some friendship with that exalted celestial's disciple, Hao Jun. Let's go and ask him together. I reckon he might have some method to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps. That Heavenly Wolf Palace Master said with a smile. Quen Ho nodded and said, that would be very good. He then looked to Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu. Brother Qin Yu, Brother Duanmu, how about we go together? There's no need. Duanmu Yu said indifferently. Qin Yu did not say much. He thought in his heart. If you want to go, then go. Duanmu Yu and I have already asked Hao Jun and Yao Lin. Quen Ho and the others began to walk toward the side palace. They planned to ascend the flight of steps leading to the side palace. Suddenly, Your Highness Zhou Xian, an amiable voice sounded from above. It was that Yao Lin. Yao Lin had a warm smile on her face. Upon seeing that it was Yao Lin, Zhou Xian immediately bowed. However, Yao Lin spoke. The exalted celestial has just sent an order for Your Highness Zhou Xian to enter the palace. This Yao Lin was a disciple of the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Thus, the Exalted Celestial she spoke of was naturally the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Zhou Xian was slightly startled. Then, an overjoyed expression appeared on his face. Quen Ho and the others looked to Zhou Xian. A trace of unconcealable jealousy flashed through their eyes. They all said in low voices, this Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian has only just arrived, and the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial's order has already arrived. He is being too biased. Qin Yu felt a burst of anger. Chapter 581. At this moment, Zhou Xian's face was filled with smiles. He faced Qin Yu and the others and said with a modest smile, everyone, I shall go and meet the exalted celestial first. I hope that everyone will be able to obtain the bestowal from the exalted celestial. As he spoke, Zhou Xian walked up the stairs of the Thunder Punishment Palace, one of the 3 great side palaces. When he reached the top and walked to Yao Lin's side, Zhou Xian even bowed very politely. Senior sister Yao Lin, thank you. Yao Lin also smiled. Then, she led Zhou Xian into the Thunder Punishment Palace. Seeing this scene from afar, Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu both felt upset. Even Quan Ho and the others began to feel indignant. Brother Duanmu, should we continue to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps? Qin Yu looked to Duanmu Yu. At this moment, Qin Yu felt resentful in his heart. I truly never would have imagined that this Thunder Punishment exalted celestial would be so clearly biased toward his own younger generation. The utmost North Sage Emperor gave us a total of 10 years to prepare. Why didn't this Thunder Punishment exalted celestial wait for 2 or 3 years before summoning Zhou Xian? Instead, he directly appeared to meet Zhou Xian the moment he arrived at the Mountain Sea Palace. Bias, this is simply too obvious. Clearly, this caused Qin Yu to feel anxious and angry. With his current state of mind, it was simply impossible for him to ascend to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Qin Yu, rest for half a day first. Adjust your state of mind and reach your best state before ascending the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Duanmu Yu's voice was still as amiable as before. Merely, Qin Yu was able to sense that Duanmu Yu's state of mind had been affected by what had happened earlier and was fluctuating slightly. Indeed, it's time to adjust my state of mind. Qin Yu walked to the green space beside them and sat down cross-legged. They had prepared for 10 years. Thus, there was no need for them to be overly anxious. Adjusting their state of mind to their best state was the most important thing. As he looked to the heaven-connecting flight of steps not far away, Qin Yu's brows started to frown. In the history of the Divine Realm, there has never been an expert below the God King level that managed to ascend to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. The difficulty should be extraordinary. This time around, I must rely on the new cosmos spatial energy. Qin Yu was very clear about his own strength. Over 3,000 years ago, when he had just come out from the cosmos, he had only just stepped into the high-level heavenly deity level. Over 3,000 years had passed, and his clone had spent over 40 million years comprehending the laws of space. His avatar had comprehended about 80% of the spatial insights the God King of Life had left behind for him. Although he had yet to reach the peak of the high-level heavenly deity level, he could be considered to be one of the more powerful high-level heavenly deities. Adding on the spatial energy of the new cosmos, his strength should be comparable to a peak high-level heavenly deity. Even if we rely on the power of space, it's hard to say whether we can reach the top or not. Qin Yu looked at the 99th step, which was nearly 100 feet high. He didn't have complete confidence. While Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu were adjusting their states of mind, the other participants of the groom search arrived at the floating island one after another. Quan Ho, Shun Tu Fan, and the others also went to look for Hao Jun. After a long time, Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu both opened their eyes. At this moment, Qin Yu had recovered to his peak state. The effects of what had happened with Zhou Xian earlier had disappeared. Brother Qin Yu, let's go? Duanmu Yu lightly smiled. Qin Yu also smiled. Very well, let's go. As the two of them spoke, they had a tacit understanding akin to that of friends. Just like that, Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu walked toward the heaven-connecting flight of steps. As for Quan Ho and the others, they were vexed about how to meet the exalted celestial the entire time. Brother Qin Yu, Brother Duanmu, it would seem that you two are truly planning to climb this flight of steps. After thinking about it for so long, I think I'll have to give it a try too. Quan Ho had a helpless expression on his face. Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu immediately smiled. Are you coming with us? Duanmu Yu looked to Quan Ho with a smile on his face. Quan Ho raised his head and looked to the 99 steps. He took a deep breath and said, "Since there's no other way, let's give it a try. If we are to be treated as clowns, then so be it." As he said that, Quan Ho looked to Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu. "I'll go with you too." Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu and Quan Ho glanced at one another. Then they all stepped forward at the same time. What a strange feeling. After stepping onto the first step, Qin Yu felt as if he had sunk into a swamp. Furthermore, he felt as if he was unable to even maintain his balance. He was unable to restrain himself from stimulating the heavenly divine energy within his body to stabilize his body. If the first step is already like this, then the 99 steps. Qin Yu looked to Duanmu Yu and Quen Ho beside him. Duanmu Yu was still fine. As for Quen Ho, he was also like Qin Yu. He only managed to stabilize himself after a slight adjustment. At this moment, the others all discovered that the three of them had ascended the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Brother Qin, are you all truly planning to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps? The other 14 people also walked over. Other than Zhou Xian, who had entered the Thunder Punishment Palace, the others had not made any progress. Qin Yu and his two companions turned around to look at the 14 people. They did not say anything and continued to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Brother Qin Yu, wait for me. A familiar voice was heard. Upon hearing it, Qin Yu knew that it was the shy genius youngster, Shen Tufan. Qin Yu and his two companions turned around to look. Shen Tufan, who was wearing a red battle gown and had a handsome appearance, had also stepped onto the heaven-connecting flight of steps. At the same time, he said to Qin Yu and his two companions with a red face, I am unable to think of any other method. I'll give it a try with you all. I've heard that the historical record for the heaven-connecting flight of steps is 95 steps. I wonder if I will be able to reach the 90th step. Historical record. Qin Yu was able to guess. It would appear that the strongest person who had not reached the God King level in history was only able to reach the 95th step. Let's go. Duanmu Yu spoke. Immediately, the four of them began to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. As for the 13 people below, they merely watched and discussed with one another. They did not attempt to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. That was because there was no need for them to attempt it. The history of their predecessors had already shown how difficult it was to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Each step was 10 meters wide. It was enough for 4 people to ascend side by side. When Qin Yu ascended to the 10th step, he completely understood. So this heaven-connecting flight of steps tests one's comprehension of the spatial laws. For the first few steps, one can still rely on one's heavenly divine energy. However, for the higher steps it is impossible. Qin Yu felt as if he had suddenly stepped onto a dark star. It also felt as if he had suddenly sunk into a thick liquid. Occasionally, he would feel as if his body was floating. Occasionally, he would feel as if he was being pressured by space. The higher one ascended, the more terrifying the pressure would be. Sometimes, the pressure would be enough to annihilate an entire galaxy in an instant. It was impossible for Qin Yu and the others to withstand the pressure with just their physical bodies. What they relied on was their usage of the spatial laws. Shifting, weakening, and even completely eliminating the pressure. Laws against laws. Quen Ho laughed softly and said, the higher one ascends, the more profound the spatial laws tested. No wonder His Majesty Sage Emperor told me that it is absolutely impossible for one to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps without reaching the God King level. From the looks of it, I reckon that this 99th step tests one's complete understanding of the spatial laws. Hearing what Quen Ho said, Qin Yu began to agree with him. Perhaps that was truly the case. Duanmu Yu laughed softly. If that is truly the case, then those 3 celestial exalts are truly toying with us. He said that they will show themselves to those who have yet to reach the God King level. However, this heaven-connecting flight of steps is something that only those who have reached the God King level can climb. In other words, the 3 celestial exalts simply do not wish to see anyone. Qin Yu also understood. Even if the 3 celestial exalts do not wish to see anyone, there is no need for them to toy with us like this. However, Qin Yu's gaze turned sharp. As long as there is hope, we cannot give up. At this moment they had only reached the 50th step. The 4 of them still had the ability to speak. However, as they continued to ascend, the 4 of them no longer spoke. 75th step. Sometimes space is being pressured. Sometimes space is being torn apart. Sometimes my body feels as if it is floating. This body is simply uncontrollable. Qin Yu also felt a burst of fatigue. At this moment, Qin Yu still had not used the spatial power of his own cosmos. If I don't use the spatial power of my new cosmos, how many steps can I reach? Qin Yu continued to clench his teeth and persevere. At this moment, his forehead was filled with soybean-sized beads of sweat. It was not only him. The genius youngster Shen Tufan also had beads of sweat on his forehead. His complexion was also extremely pale. Only Duanmu Yu and Quen Ho merely had slightly red complexions. Their condition could still be considered normal. These two people were both peak high-level heavenly deities. Their comprehension of space was a bit higher than Qin Yu and Shen Tufan's. 80th step. At the moment when Qin Yu stepped onto the first step, his entire body started to tremble. Qin Yu felt as if he was a small boat within a violent ocean. He was already unable to control the habits of this violent ocean. Bang! A crashing sound was heard. Qin Yu, Quen Ho all turned around to look. They saw that Shen Tufan had fallen down from the flight of steps. After that, he fell to the ground and vomited a mouthful of blood. With a pale complexion, Shen Tufan stood up. He smiled at Qin Yu, Quen Ho and said, "The three of you, it's up to you now. I had originally planned to persevere until the 90th step. Never would I have expected that I would be unable to persevere until the 80th step." Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu and Quen Ho all smiled encouragingly at Shen Tufan. Although Shen Tufan had failed, Qin Yu, Quen Ho all had a favorable impression of him. The four of them had ascended the flight of steps together. In the process of ascending the flight of steps, their favorable impression of one another had greatly increased. When the four of them simultaneously did something that others would think only madmen would do, the four of them would all have a favorable impression of one another. Everyone, let's continue. Perhaps the three exalted celestials might make an exception and come see us because of how hard we've worked. Duanmu Yu said with a low voice and a smile. Qin Yu and Quen Ho both smiled and nodded. Let's work hard. The three of them continued to ascend the flight of steps. When they reached the 83rd step, Qin Yu also felt that the spatial pressure was extremely powerful. It had already surpassed the range of what he could endure. He was about to fall down. Forget about it. At this moment, Qin Yu finally used his new cosmos's spatial energy. This spatial energy was completely under Qin Yu's control. It directly protected Qin Yu. In an instant, the pressure decreased by over 90%. Perhaps I might even have the hope of reaching the top. Qin Yu sensed the protective effect of the spatial energy. A trace of hope rose in his heart. 1 step, 2 steps. Duanmu Yu and Quen Ho, these two peak high-level heavenly deity experts, both had sweat on their foreheads. At this moment they had already reached the 88th step. As they continued to ascend, every step was incomparably difficult. Qin Yu, who originally still had hope, felt that with every step he ascended, the pressure increased by a lot. Even if I rely on this spatial energy, I might not necessarily be able to reach the top. Qin Yu grew anxious. Unfortunately, the amount of spatial energy I've used is too little. The new cosmos was still in the process of growth. If Qin Yu was able to use even 1% of the cosmos's spatial energy, then Qin Yu would be able to easily reach the top. However, now, the spatial energy that Qin Yu had used only covered over 100 miles. Compared to the entire cosmos, its range was still too small. The amount of spatial energy was too little. It was only because Qin Yu was able to completely control the spatial energy that the spatial energy was so powerful. 90th step. Bang. Quen Ho's complexion instantly turned extremely red. It was as if he had been smashed by a frightening power. Blood splattered all over the sky as he fell down. Qin Yu knew very well. It was the enormous oppression of space. It was so oppressive that he vomited blood. That was because at this moment, Qin Yu also felt how powerful that oppression was. Qin Yu took a glance at Duanmu Yu beside him. With great effort he squeezed out 2 words. Do your best. Duanmu Yu was sweating profusely. His complexion had also turned somewhat pale. He merely smiled at Qin Yu. The current Duanmu Yu was unable to say a single word. The two of them continued to persevere. 91st step. Qin Yu felt that his chest was suffocating. The spatial energy surrounding him had started to tremble slightly from the oppression. 92nd step. Bang. Qin Yu only heard a tremor in the air. Blood flowed out from Duanmu Yu's mouth. Then he powerlessly fell down. When Duanmu Yu landed on the ground, he did his best to flip himself over and kneeled on the ground. Duanmu Yu raised his head to look at Qin Yu. He squeezed out a smile and said, "Do your best." Qin Yu felt a burst of emotion in his heart. As he looked to the final few steps, Qin Yu clenched his teeth and continued to climb. The 10+ people below all held their breaths as they watched Qin Yu climb step by step with great difficulty. It's already the 95th step. He has tied with the highest record. Quain Ho gasped in admiration. Perhaps he might really succeed, Duanmu Yu said softly. 96th step. Qin Yu's face was as pale as paper. His entire body was swaying. However, he still continued to ascend another step. 97th step. Bang! Practically everyone heard the sound of the air trembling. Qin Yu, whose complexion was deathly pale without the slightest trace of blood, vomited a mouthful of blood and powerlessly fell down. At this moment, Qin Yu simply did not have the strength to move at all. "Brother Qin Yu, are you all right?" Duanmu Yu and the others immediately supported Qin Yu. After a short moment, Qin Yu stood up with great difficulty. After leaving the steps, Qin Yu's injuries began to heal at an astonishing speed. I still failed. Qin Yu's body was trembling slightly. Earlier, when he reached the 96th step, Qin Yu was actually about to fall down. However, Qin Yu had risked his life to hold on. However, after climbing another step, he was blasted down without any resistance. That Zhou Xian came out. Suddenly someone spoke. Qin Yu wiped away the blood from the corner of his mouth. He stood up straight and looked toward the direction of the Thunder Punishment Palace. He saw a smiling Zhou Xian walking out of the Thunder Punishment Palace with a black scepter in his hand. Chapter 582. Before everyone's attentive gazes, Zhou Xian held a black scepter in his hand and walked down the flight of stairs with a smile on his face. He then saw Qin Yu and the others. With a smile on his face, he walked over. "Brother Qin Yu, what happened to you? Before I entered the Thunder Punishment Palace, you were still fine. How did you end up injured?" Zhou Xian saw that there were bloodstains on Qin Yu's clothes and asked with a concerned appearance. It was only then that Qin Yu noticed the bloodstains on his clothes. Immediately, his black gown shook and the bloodstains disappeared. "It's nothing," Qin Yu replied indifferently. Qin Yu didn't answer. However, someone else spoke out and said, "Brother Zhou Xian, earlier Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu and them, a total of 4 people tried to climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Merely they did not succeed and fell down the steps." Zhou Xian uttered an "oh." He had an appearance of sudden realization. Then he looked to Qin Yu, curled his lips and sighed. "Brother Qin Yu, could it be that you all do not know that it is absolutely impossible for one to reach the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps before reaching the God King level? Never would I have expected that while I was entering the Thunder Punishment Palace, you all still managed to climb the steps." Qin Yu started to frown. A trace of anger appeared in his heart. This Zhou Xian has obtained a gift bestowed by the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Yet he is now making sarcastic remarks. Qin Yu, who was feeling angry in his heart, remained silent. He simply ignored Zhou Xian. Quain Ho was very magnanimous. He continued to smile and said, "Brother Zhou Xian, to be able to obtain a gift bestowed by the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial, there is naturally no need for you to be too distressed. As for us, there is no other way. We can only attempt to climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Although we did not succeed, there is no harm in trying. Duanmuyu also smiled indifferently and said no more. The final person of the four who attempted to climb the steps, Shen Tufan, started to frown. Evidently, he felt a trace of disgust toward Zhou Xian. Brother Zhou Xian, congratulations on obtaining a gift bestowed by the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. What did the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial bestow upon you? Might we be able to have a look at it? Suddenly someone spoke. Immediately, everyone looked to Zhou Xian's eyes. Qin Yu also wanted to know what item Zhou Xian had obtained. He could not help but look at Zhou Xian. Ha! Zhou Xian laughed heartily and raised the black scepter in his hand. Qin Ho said in surprise, "Brother Zhou Xian, could it be that Empyrean Thunder Punishment bestowed this black scepter? At first glance, I didn't pay much attention to it. Now that I've observed it carefully, this black ruby seems to have something special about it." Qin Yu also looked at the black ruby. The power of space spread out and carefully observed the black ruby. With merely a glance, Qin Yu sensed an aura. The aura of a grand mist spiritual treasure. It's actually a grand mist spiritual treasure. Qin Yu's eyebrows twitched. His gaze was focused on that black scepter. Merely, I wonder what level this grand mist spiritual treasure is. It was impossible to see through this black ruby just by relying on divine sense or the power of space. Only by dripping a drop of blood on it would he be able to fully understand the details of this black ruby. Duanmuyu laughed lightly and said, "How could something bestowed by an exalted celestial be an ordinary item? It should be a grand mist spiritual treasure, right?" The others immediately began to discuss among themselves. Those people did not possess Qin Yu's spatial energy. Furthermore, it was unsuitable for them to use their divine senses to observe the black ruby. If they were to do that, they would definitely be discovered by Zhou Xian. That would make them appear reckless. Those people all grew curious. Was it really a grand mist spiritual treasure? Zhou Xian smiled confidently. "That's right. This black ruby bestowed by an exalted celestial is a grand mist spiritual treasure. The exalted celestial also knew about my participation in the groom search. Thus, this grand mist spiritual treasure could be considered as a gift." Sure enough, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial thought very highly of Brother Zhou Xian. "Brother Zhou Xian has only just arrived at the Levitation Island, yet you've already obtained a grand mist spiritual treasure," someone said with a smile. Zhou Xian smiled lightly. There was a trace of complacency in his eyes. After obtaining a grand mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial, Zhou Xian felt that the first chosen candidate spot for the groom search would definitely be his. Inevitably, he revealed a complacent expression on his face. Grand Mist Spiritual Treasure. Grand Mist spiritual treasures are separated into third-rate, second-rate and first-rate. May I know what level this Grand Mist spiritual treasure is? Qin Ho directly asked. It was not only Qin Ho who was curious. Even Qin Yu wanted to know. Zhou Xian smiled indifferently. With a flip of his hand, he put away the black ruby. He glanced at the crowd and then said, "Let's not talk about what level this black ruby is. Everyone should know that the first round of the groom search is to obtain a grand mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial. If none of you are able to obtain an exalted celestial spiritual treasure, then not to mention my grand mist spiritual treasure, even if this black ruby is an ordinary item, I will still win. Thus, it is better that everyone think of a way to obtain a grand mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial." Qin Yu, Duanmuyu, Qin Ho, Shen Tufan and the others were all stunned. Although Zhou Xian's words were arrogant, everyone knew that what Zhou Xian said was very reasonable. If they were unable to obtain a grand mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial, then regardless of how lousy the item that Zhou Xian obtained might be, it would still be an item bestowed by an exalted celestial. As such, the first chosen candidate spot would belong to Zhou Xian. Everyone dispersed. Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu, Shen Tufan and Quen Ho sat together on a lawn. After climbing the Grand Mist spiritual treasure together, the four of them had grown closer to one another. After taking a glance at the three people beside him, Qin Yu began to ponder on how to obtain a Grand Mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial. That utmost North Sage Emperor gave me a total of 10 years to prepare. My new cosmos time acceleration has already surpassed 10,000 times. 10 years is equivalent to 100,000 years. 100,000 years of bitter cultivation will not increase my clone's comprehension of the spatial laws by much. In order to ascend the heaven-reaching flight of steps, there were two ways. One was to increase one's comprehension of the spatial laws. The other was to increase one's control over the spatial energy. 100,000 years, the increase in one's comprehension of the spatial laws is too little. As for the spatial energy, the increase in spatial energy will follow the evolution of the entire cosmos. Has nothing to do with the time acceleration. In less than 10 years, the amount of spatial energy that can be increased is also very little. Qin Yu was unable to refrain himself from frowning. What should he do? At this moment, Qin Yu was unable to think of anything. Suddenly, a voice sounded beside Qin Yu. Brother Zhou Xian has obtained a Grand Mist spiritual treasure bestowed by an exalted celestial. Why are you still here and not returning? Qin Yu raised his head to look over. It turned out that Zhou Xian was also sitting cross-legged beside him. The one who had asked the question was Quen Ho. Zhou Xian smiled indifferently. Although I have obtained a gift, there are 3 exalted celestials. Perhaps I might be able to obtain a gift from exalted celestial Carefree or exalted celestial Fluttering Feathers. Why would I be in a hurry to return? After saying that, Zhou Xian paused for a moment. Then he continued. Furthermore, it's only 10 years. It's not bad for me to stay here and accompany you all. Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu, Shen Tufan, and Quen Ho all smiled and did not say anything. At this moment, Zhou Xian recalled the words that the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial had said to him. Xian, let me remind you. After you obtain this scepter, there is no need for you to be in a hurry to return. For some unknown reason, eldest senior brother Fluttering Feathers, who has always been secretive, is actually paying close attention to this groom search. Not only me, eldest senior brother Fluttering Feathers and junior brother Carefree are also on the 1,000 islands around the Mountain Sea Palace. Whether or not you'll be able to encounter them will depend on your luck. Zhou Xian closed his eyes. Then he slowly exhaled. A flash of lightning flashed through his eyes. Exalted Celestial Fluttering Feathers. Of the 3 exalted celestials, the strongest, most secretive, and most mysterious exalted celestial Fluttering Feathers was actually on the 1,000 islands around the Mountain Sea Palace. This news was truly too shocking. If it was someone else who said this, Zhou Xian would think that person to be talking in his sleep. However, these words were personally said by his grandfather, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Thus, Zhou Xian was not in a hurry to return. He planned to try his luck in these 10 years. Perhaps he might really encounter the exalted celestial Fluttering Feathers. Earlier, I've already ascended to the 97th step. If I were to be more careful in controlling my spatial energy, I might be able to advance even further. Qin Yu clenched his teeth and stood up again. No matter what, he could not give up. Brother Qin Yu, what are you doing? Seeing Qin Yu stand up, Duanmu Yu, Quen Ho, Shen Tufan, and Zhou Xian all looked over. Continue to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps, Qin Yu said directly. As he said those words, Qin Yu began to walk toward the Mountain Sea Palace with large strides. Seeing Qin Yu's back view as he walked toward the heaven-connecting flight of steps, Duanmu Yu and the others were slightly shocked. Without prior consultation, they all stood up and walked toward Qin Yu. Right after Qin Yu began to walk, Quen Ho spoke. Qin Yu, for the heaven-connecting flight of steps, the difficulty will increase by a lot with each additional step. Although you've ascended to the 97th step, it is simply impossible for you to ascend to the 98th step. It is simply not that easy to increase one's comprehension of spatial energy. Qin Yu's body stopped. Qin Yu had a bitter smile on his face. He thought to himself, how could I not know? However, I cannot give up. With that, Qin Yu continued to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. However, at this moment, the air started to buzz. A white-gowned youth was flying toward them. His target was the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Qin Yu and the others turned around to look. High-level heavenly deity. Qin Yu immediately determined this person's strength. This white-gowned youth was someone that Qin Yu had never seen before. He was also not one of the 18 candidates. This white-gowned youth had a grim expression. He completely ignored Qin Yu and the others and directly landed beside the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Then, without saying anything, he began to climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps. His speed was extremely fast. This white-gowned youth seemed to be very familiar with the heaven-connecting flight of steps. In the blink of an eye, he had climbed 50 steps in succession. After that, he continued to climb upward. This person has come again. The disciple of the unfettered exalted celestial, Hao Jun, walked toward Qin Yu and the others with a smile on his face. Brother Hao Jun, what's going on? Who is that person? Xian asked. Hao Jun lightly smiled and said, in the past several million years, this white-gowned youth has frequently come to climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Several million years ago, he was only a low-level heavenly deity. Now he is already a high-level heavenly deity. It's only been several million years. His cultivation has increased this fast. Qin Ho said in shock. His cultivation speed was truly astonishing. This white-gowned youth is not fond of talking. I've tried to chat with him before. However, he ignored me. Merely, he would climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps every several thousand years. Hao Jun said with a smile. Qin Yu slightly frowned. He raised his head and looked to the white-gowned youth who was climbing the heaven-connecting flight of steps. If he is unable to reach the top, then why is he climbing the heaven-connecting flight of steps again and again? Qin Yu was puzzled. At the beginning, the white-gowned youth's climbing speed was relatively fast. However, upon reaching the 70th step, it began to slow down. Upon reaching the 80th step, it became even more difficult. One step after another. Everyone was able to see that the white-gowned youth was giving his all. When he reached the 85th step, the white-gowned youth was blasted down. After falling to the ground, the white-gowned youth tried his best to stand back up. He gasped for breath and then said in a low voice, 85th target reached. After that, the white-gowned youth closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. Brother, Qin Ho said. However, that white-gowned youth was still healing his injuries with his eyes closed. He had completely ignored Qin Ho. There's no need to say anything. He will not pay attention to you, Hao Jun said with a smile. After a short moment, that white-gowned youth opened his eyes. He swept his gaze over the crowd and then directly flew away from the levitation island. That person is truly a maverick, Zhou Xian laughed lightly. However, within his tone, there was a trace of disdain toward that white-gowned youth. Hao Jun exclaimed in admiration. That white-gowned youth's improvement is extremely great. Last time he had only reached the 83rd step. I had originally thought that it would be very amazing for him to be able to reach the 84th step this time. Never would I have imagined that he would actually reach the 85th step. Brother Qin Yu, Qin Ho spoke. At this moment, Qin Yu had already begun to climb the heaven-connecting flight of steps. After his first attempt, Qin Yu was already somewhat familiar with the heaven-connecting flight of steps. In the beginning, Qin Yu's speed of climbing the heaven-connecting flight of steps was relatively fast. In an instant he had reached the 70th step. Why is this Qin Yu so stubborn? Zhou Xian shook his head and sneered. As for Shen Tufan, Duanmu Yu, Qin Ho and Hao Jun, they raised their heads and watched as Qin Yu climbed the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Chapter 583. Beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead. Qin Yu's gaze was fixed on the 99th step of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. At this moment it was already the 95th step. This time, Qin Yu had been using his spatial energy since the very beginning when he ascended the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Thus, Qin Yu had become even more familiar with controlling the spatial energy. He had also become more experienced in resisting the spatial pressure. The spatial energy surrounding Qin Yu would occasionally ripple like waves. Occasionally, it would swirl like a whirlpool. Occasionally, it would swirl like a cone. In short, with the smallest price, Qin Yu was able to remove all sorts of spatial pressure, lockdown, binding, etc. This time, it should be a bit better than the first time. Qin Yu suddenly took another step forward. The 96th step. Last time I had already reached my limit on the 96th step. I had only just reached the 97th step when I was blasted down. This time, it seems to be slightly better. Qin Yu had a trace of joy that was difficult to conceal in his heart. Qin Yu was not in a hurry to ascend to the 97th step. Instead, he stayed on the 96th step to familiarize himself with the higher-level spatial attacks. The people below were all holding their breaths. In the past, the highest record was only the 95th step. However, Qin Yu had already broken through. Even if Qin Yu were to fail, they would still feel admiration for Qin Yu in their hearts. Why did brother Qin Yu stop on the 96th step? Shun Tufan asked in a puzzled manner. Duanmu Yu and Quen Ho also shook their heads to indicate that they did not know. As they saw it, every step tested one's comprehension of the spatial laws. There was no benefit in staying on a certain step for a long time. However, they did not know. Qin Yu was accumulating experience. He was accumulating experience in using his spatial energy to resist the various spatial attacks. The more time passed, the more experience Qin Yu would gain. Qin Yu stayed on the 96th step for an entire hour. Last time, Qin Yu had only just reached the 97th step when he was blasted down. I wonder if this time, Quen Ho said in a low voice. Qin Yu has moved, Hao Jun suddenly said. At this moment, a lot of people had been attracted by Qin Yu climbing the heaven-reaching steps. All of them raised their heads to watch Qin Yu climbing the heaven-reaching steps. When they heard Qin Yu moved, all of their eyes shone as they focused on Qin Yu. One step. Qin Yu had already reached the 97th floor. Under everyone's gaze, Qin Yu's entire body swayed slightly on the 97th floor, but he still stood firm and did not fall. He stopped. Quen Ho, Duanmu Yu, Shun Tufan and the others were all shocked. Last time, Qin Yu had been blasted down the moment he reached the 97th floor. This meant that Qin Yu was unable to withstand the spatial attacks of the 97th floor. But why was Qin Yu able to stand on the 97th floor in such a short time? This improvement was simply too great. Spatial comprehension can improve so quickly. Zhou Xian muttered in a low voice in disbelief. The group of people below did not know that the difference between the first time and the second time was so short. Thus, it was only natural that one's spatial comprehension would not improve by much. What Qin Yu improved was his experience in using spatial energy to defend against spatial attacks. How to use a small amount of spatial energy to defend against powerful attacks. Persevere, persevere. On the 97th floor, Qin Yu used the same strategy as on the 96th floor. He was not in a rush to take another step forward. Instead, he began to familiarize himself with spatial attacks of a greater degree. Qin Yu's body would sway from time to time. However, he was rapidly controlling the spatial energy. At this moment, the spatial energy had been suppressed to a meter around him. Qin Yu was frantically adjusting his spatial energy to defend against the spatial pressure. I feel as if I am a small boat in a raging sea that could capsize at any moment. Qin Yu felt very tired. Every single time he resisted a spatial attack, it seemed as if he had reached Qin Yu's limit. Time and time again, he challenged Qin Yu's limit. Qin Yu was doing his best to persevere. Bang! A slight mistake caused Qin Yu to be knocked down the flight of steps. The frightening spatial pressure caused Qin Yu's sternum to shatter. His chest caved in. He powerlessly fell to the ground. Brother Qin Yu, Duanmu Yu, Quan Ho and the others hurriedly supported him. Qin Yu's injuries were quickly healed. His body began to swell, and the bloodstains disappeared without a trace. "Are you all right?" Duanmu Yu looked to Qin Yu. At this moment, Qin Yu's expression was very calm. There was no change in his expression at all. This caused Duanmu Yu to be worried about Qin Yu's state of mind. "I'm fine," Qin Yu said. However, his gaze was still fixed on the 99th floor of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Accumulate experience, accumulate experience. Once I am able to stand firm on the 97th floor, and then try my best to persevere on the 98th floor for a while longer, I will be able to rapidly ascend to the 99th floor. Even if I am instantly knocked down, at least, I will have reached the top, Qin Yu thought to himself. Qin Yu's thought process was very good. The way Qin Yu saw it, there was still a trace of possibility for him to succeed. "Brother Qin Yu, what are you planning to do?" Quan Ho said in astonishment. At this moment, the surrounding people were all astonished. The reason for that was because Qin Yu had once again ascended the steps. He had failed twice, yet he still wanted to ascend. No one understood what Qin Yu was thinking. This Qin Yu, could it be that he believes that ascending the heaven-connecting flight of steps will increase his comprehension of space? Zhou Xian said with a frown. No one understood what Qin Yu was thinking. However, Qin Yu still continued to ascend. Once again, Qin Yu ascended to the 97th floor. On the 97th floor, Qin Yu stopped and began to familiarize himself with the various spatial attacks. "If I am unable to even stand stably on the 97th floor, I reckon that I will be blasted down the moment I reach the 98th floor." Qin Yu was very familiar with the difference between each floor. Closing his eyes, Qin Yu was even able to picture all sorts of strange spatial attacks in his mind. He then strove to stand stably amidst all sorts of attacks. After about the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Qin Yu was once again blasted down. Qin Yu propped himself against the ground with one hand and stood up. He looked to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. "Right now, it is as if I am walking on a tightrope. I could be blasted down at any moment. I am still unable to stand stably." After that, Qin Yu ignored the words of the surrounding people and continued to ascend the steps. Duanmu Yu, Quan Ho, Shun Tufan and the others glanced at one another. Then they walked to the side and sat down cross-legged. They no longer spoke. As for the others, they all dispersed. "That Qin Yu, if he wants to be tortured, then he can slowly be tortured," Zhou Xian muttered with a sneer. Then he walked to the side and no longer bothered with Qin Yu. Boom! Qin Yu once again fell to the ground. Duanmu Yu, who was sitting cross-legged beside him, opened his eyes to take a glance. Duanmu Yu had already forgotten how many times Qin Yu had attempted to ascend the steps. It had already been half a year. For an entire half a year, Qin Yu had attempted to ascend the steps again and again. Again and again he had fallen. In the past half a year, Qin Yu had actually remained on the 97th step the entire time. He did not ascend any further. Qin Yu. Duanmu Yu felt that he was slightly moved. If I had persevered like this with Qin Yu back then, perhaps the ending would have been different. A trace of pain suddenly flashed through Duanmu Yu's eyes. His complexion turned pale. "No, persevered. I am already in such a state. If I were to continue to wrong myself and persevere, what meaning would there be in obtaining her?" In Qin Yu's eyes, it seemed as if there was nothing that could cause Duanmu Yu's emotions to fluctuate. At this moment, a person that could be said to be perfect was trembling in pain. In merely a short moment, Duanmu Yu had completely calmed down. When it's time to give up, then give up. Duanmu Yu then closed his eyes. It was still the 97th step. At this moment, Qin Yu had been standing on the 97th step for nearly an hour now. The spatial energy surrounding his body was changing in a very smooth manner. It was cleverly resisting the attacks again and again. It's about time. I can attempt the next step. Qin Yu's gaze suddenly turned sharp. He took a step forward. At this moment, not a single person was paying attention to Qin Yu. Qin Yu's repeated attempts over the past half a year had caused those people to become numb to it. There were even some people who felt that Qin Yu was a paranoid maniac. At this moment, Qin Yu had stepped onto the 98th step. Naturally, no one was paying attention to him. At the instant that he stepped onto the 98th step, Qin Yu felt his body tremble violently. However, Qin Yu's eyes turned red. He hysterically controlled his spatial energy to resist the incoming attacks. I only need a moment to take another step forward. On the 98th step, Qin Yu felt that his body was on the verge of collapse. He felt as if he could be blasted down at any moment. Thus, he did not care about anything else and directly took another step forward. The 99th step. As soon as Qin Yu stepped onto the 99th step, he felt an irresistible spatial pressure. His entire body was blasted down without the slightest bit of resistance. Pang! He landed heavily on the ground. Several of Qin Yu's bones were broken from the pressure. His blood dyed the ground red. However, Qin Yu was smiling. Although the time was very short, I have at least reached the 99th step. Qin Yu felt his heartbeat quicken. If the celestial venerables kept their word and I reached the 99th step, they should have shown themselves to me. Qin Yu could not help but clench his fists tightly. His body trembled slightly. In his mind, Lu Xing's tears shot out a green light. In the blink of an eye, Qin Yu's injuries were completely healed. Qin Yu stood up and swept his gaze across the three side palaces. Suddenly, Hao Jun appeared before the entrance of the unfettered palace. Qin Yu's perseverance is astonishing. He has finally reached the 99th step of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. The unfettered exalted celestial has just sent a decree to have Qin Yu enter the unfettered palace. Hao Jun's clear voice spread throughout the entire levitation island. Ah! Everyone who heard this voice was shocked. Even Duanmu Yu, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, opened his eyes in shock. He looked at Qin Yu. What? He reached the 99th step. Zhou Xian, who was chatting with Yao Lin, suddenly turned around and looked in Qin Yu's direction. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Duanmu Yu, Quan Ho, Shun Tufan, and the others were all gathered there. Everyone was looking at Qin Yu in shock. At this moment, Qin Yu had a slight smile on his face. Duanmu Yu walked over to Qin Yu. His eyes were filled with shock, admiration, experience, and admiration. Soon after, he smiled and sighed. Qin Yu, I truly never expected that you would be able to ascend to the 99th step. I, Duanmu Yu, admire you. Quan Ho also walked over. There was a trace of joy in his eyes. Qin Yu, you actually managed to ascend to the 99th step. I also admire you. Shun Tufan also walked over. Different from Zhou Xian, Qin Yu had tried his best to ascend the steps time and time again. In the past half year, how many times had Qin Yu failed? The surrounding people simply did not know. However, they knew that Qin Yu had failed many times every day. He had tried non-stop for an entire half year. Qin Yu had succeeded. He was not a god king, yet he had ascended the heaven-connecting flight of steps. This was a record in the divine realm. Brother Qin Yu, the exalted celestial is still waiting for you in the unfettered palace. Hao Jun's voice sounded from above. Qin Yu lightly nodded. He then cupped his hands toward Duanmu Yu, Shun Tufan, and the others. Everyone, I will be going up first. Duanmu Yu and the others nodded with smiles on their faces. Before everyone's attentive gazes, Qin Yu directly ascended the flight of steps before the unfettered palace. The gazes of the majority of these people were filled with admiration. As for Zhou Xian, who had long since obtained the exalted celestial's bestowment, he felt very upset. Qin Yu would also be bestowed by the exalted celestial. At that time, only he and Qin Yu would be bestowed by the exalted celestial. However, Qin Yu had ascended to the 99th step of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. What about him? Brother Hao Jun. After ascending the flight of steps, Qin Yu bowed to Hao Jun. The exalted celestial is in the garden behind the unfettered palace. Hao Jun guided Qin Yu. Qin Yu nodded and smiled gratefully. Then he stepped into the unfettered palace. I finally succeeded. Walking on the path, Qin Yu's heart was filled with excitement. However, when he approached the entrance of the garden, Qin Yu felt somewhat nervous. The exalted celestial. He was going to see the exalted celestial. The legendary elusive exalted celestial. Even the craftsman god Che Ho Yuan had never seen the exalted celestial. As for him, Qin Yu, he would soon be able to see the exalted celestial. With a single step, he stepped through the entrance of the garden. Qin Yu's heart immediately calmed down. To be exact, the simple and tranquil atmosphere of the garden had affected Qin Yu. After entering the garden, Qin Yu swept his gaze around. An arrogant and thin figure had his hands behind his back. His back was facing Qin Yu. Qin Yu immediately locked onto this purple-gowned thin figure. Just by looking at his back he should be a man. Qin Yu's heart started to tremble slightly. Is this person the legendary, unfettered, exalted celestial? When this purple-gowned man saw Qin Yu looking at him, he also turned around at the same time. What does the unfettered exalted celestial look like? Qin Yu stared at the purple-gowned man without blinking. When the purple-gowned man turned around and his face was reflected in Qin Yu's eyes, Qin Yu's attention was locked onto that pair of eyes. That pair of eyes was actually a dark red. Chapter 584. No, it's not dark red eyes. Instead, Qin Yu carefully observed the purple-gowned man's eyes. He discovered that the purple-gowned man's eyes were emitting a faint red light. The purple-gowned man's eyes were actually black in color. However, when the purple-gowned man looked at Qin Yu, his eyes emitted a red light. This caused Qin Yu to think that the purple-gowned man's eyes were dark red to begin with. Emitting red light. Qin Yu was startled. He knew a lot of people. However, very few people had eyes that emitted red light. Fei, that's right, Fei. Ho Fei was originally a fiery-eyed water ape. Once he carefully observed something. His originally black eyes would emit a faint red light. His situation was very similar to the purple-gowned man before him. The purple-gowned man before him had eyes that emitted red light. Was he a fiery-eyed water ape? Or did he train in some sort of special martial technique? Qin Yu found it unsuitable to ask. That was because he was unable to see through the strength of the purple-gowned man before him. Currently, Qin Yu was also a high-level heavenly deity. For him to be unable to see through his strength, the purple-gowned man was at least a god-king. This junior is Qin Yu. May I know if senior is senior unfettered exalted celestial? Qin Yu respectfully greeted. A smile appeared on the purple-gowned man's face. His gaze was fixed onto Qin Yu. Qin Yu, that's right. It is as you've thought. I am the unfettered exalted celestial. Come, let's sit down and talk. This unfettered exalted celestial had a smile on his face. Qin Yu was unable to sense the slightest bit of pressure from him. It was as if the purple-gowned man before him was an ordinary mortal. However, ordinary mortals would not be like this purple-gowned man, causing Qin Yu to be unable to see through him. At this moment, the unfettered exalted celestial had already sat down. He took a glance at Qin Yu and pointed to the stool beside him. With a light smile he said, "Why aren't you sitting down?" "Yes." Qin Yu accepted the order and sat to the side. Don't be too reserved. Just treat it as if you are speaking to your own elder. The unfettered exalted celestial was able to sense that Qin Yu was reserved. don't be too reserved. Qin Yu felt bitter in his heart. Heavens, the person in front of him was the legendary exalted celestial. Even the craftsman god Cheho Yuan had never seen this exalted celestial before. The more this unfettered exalted celestial asked him to relax, the harder it was for Qin Yu to relax. The unfettered heavenly venerate nodded and said with a smile, "You're already not bad. At least you can maintain a calm appearance in front of me. In front of me, those 8 great sage emperors can't even maintain their calm on the surface." Qin Yu couldn't help but feel surprised. 8 great saint emperors. Unfettered exalted celestial continued with a smile. "The main reason I came to see you this time is because you have reached the 99th step of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. According to our original rules, once you reach the top, one of the 3 Empyreans will have to come and see you. That's why I came." Qin Yu could only force himself to smile. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. It was as if he was worried that he wouldn't be able to say anything good. Qin Yu, because eldest senior brother is paying more attention to the groom search this time. Second senior brother and I are also paying attention to it. When the unfettered exalted celestial said this, the smile on Qin Yu's face froze. Qin Yu was able to guess that only the thunder punishment exalted celestial and the floating feathers exalted celestial were able to make the unfettered exalted celestial address them as eldest senior brother and second senior brother. Qin Yu's heart moved. This unfettered exalted celestial said that the floating feathers exalted celestial was paying more attention to the groom search. That's why he and the thunder punishment exalted celestial were paying attention to it. Just from this, it could be seen that the floating feathers exalted celestial's status was much higher. It's just that. Why would the floating feathers exalted celestial pay attention to the groom search? Qin Yu couldn't figure it out at all. Li Er's public groom search might have a very large influence in the divine realm. However, to the floating feathers exalted celestial, what sort of attraction did it have? I'm thinking, why is eldest senior brother paying attention to the groom search? The unfettered exalted celestial's brows knitted together. Unfortunately, I can't figure it out. Qin Yu looked at the unfettered exalted celestial before him. Qin Yu knew that the unfettered exalted celestial had grasped an opportunity in that incomparable war 6 quadrillion years ago, and became the new exalted celestial. When I was paying attention to the groom search together with eldest senior brother, I had already noticed you. The unfettered exalted celestial smiled as he looked at Qin Yu. After noticing you, I also noticed your 2 brothers. One is called Ho Fei and the other is called Kuro. Qin Yu's attention was completely focused. He was slightly worried in his heart. Why did this unfettered exalted celestial mention Fei and Xiao Hei? Qin Yu, although your cultivation speed is fast and your experiences can be said to be full of ups and downs, however, at the very least it's still within the scope of logic. However, there is one thing that puzzles me. That brother of yours, Kuro. He seems to have some comprehension of the temporal laws. The unfettered exalted celestial's brows knitted together. Qin Yu's heart skipped a beat. Kuro's flowing light spear Dao was an application of the temporal laws. Logically speaking, without reaching the God-King realm, one cannot comprehend the temporal laws. I had once asked eldest senior brother about this matter. Eldest senior brother's answer also puzzled me for a while. Haha, I said too much. The unfettered exalted celestial chuckled. Eldest senior brother's answer. Qin Yu became curious. How did the fluttering feathers exalted celestial answer? Qin Yu knew that with the exalted celestial's abilities, the exalted celestial would more or less know every single action of the 3 brothers. Senior exalted celestial unfettered. Qin Yu rarely spoke. Seeing Qin Yu speak, the exalted celestial unfettered's eyes lit up. What is it? Gifts. What Qin Yu wanted the most in his heart was a gift from an exalted celestial. This time, he came to meet with the exalted celestial unfettered for this. However, the exalted celestial unfettered talked a lot with him but did not mention anything about gifts. Qin Yu was also somewhat anxious. Without gifts, what would he do in the groom search? Even if he met an exalted celestial, there would be no gifts. He still did not have the qualifications to compete with Zhou Xian for the first spot. However, this gift, could Qin Yu directly ask for it? Senior Exalted Celestial Unfettered, I am just curious. What did eldest senior brother say? I also find it strange that Xiao Hei was able to comprehend a portion of the temporal laws. Qin Yu was stunned and changed the topic. He could not directly ask for a gift. A trace of ridicule flashed across the Exalted Celestial Unfettered's eyes. As an Exalted Celestial, how could he not guess what Qin Yu was thinking? However, the Exalted Celestial Unfettered still said in all seriousness. What eldest senior brother said. Second senior brother, and I asked eldest senior brother about this matter. Eldest senior brother said. There is a reason for existence. There is no need to ask or investigate. There is a reason for existence. Qin Yu was also astonished by the reaction of the floating feathers Exalted Celestial. Immediately, Qin Yu became curious. Why would the Exalted Celestial Unfettered and the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial ask the floating feathers Exalted Celestial when they were puzzled? Qin Yu lowered his head and exhaled, throwing away the puzzlement in his mind. At this moment, what Qin Yu was most anxious about was the gift bestowed by the Exalted Celestial. Qin Yu raised his head and looked at the Exalted Celestial Unfettered. The Exalted Celestial Unfettered still had a faint smile on his face. Seeing Qin Yu's current expression, he even revealed a puzzled look at Qin Yu, as if asking, is there something you need? However, could Qin Yu ask for a gift? He was anxious. Haha! The Exalted Celestial Unfettered suddenly laughed loudly. This is too interesting. Qin Yu, if you have a mirror, look at your current expression and gaze. This is too interesting. The Exalted Celestial Unfettered suddenly held his stomach and laughed loudly. His laughter was incomparably exaggerated. Come, take a look for yourself. The Exalted Celestial Unfettered waved his hand, and many water droplets gathered together to form a mirror. Within the mirror were Qin Yu's expressions from earlier. Nervousness, anticipation, hesitation, impatience. Those gazes and expressions were indeed marvelous. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. I also know why you people who are participating in the groom search have come here. The Exalted Celestial Unfettered flipped his hand, and a bronze-colored bottle gourd appeared on his palm. Qin Yu's gaze was immediately fixed on the bottle gourd. The Exalted Celestial Unfettered sighed. Although we are Exalted Celestials, Grand Mist spiritual treasures are formed by the world. We also have very few of them on us. This jade spring bottle gourd is a spiritual treasure that I accidentally discovered when I was roaming the universe. You can take it. The jade spring bottle gourd floated from the Exalted Celestial Unfettered's hand and floated over to Qin Yu. Qin Yu received the jade spring bottle gourd and immediately dripped a drop of blood on it. Dripping a drop of blood was merely the first step in refining a grand mist spiritual treasure. However, once it was dripped, Qin Yu would, at the very least, possess the authority to control the jade spring bottle gourd. Jade spring bottle gourd. It can release jade spring to bind and attack. Qin Yu immediately realized the general function of the jade spring bottle gourd. At the same time, he also had a rough estimation of the jade spring bottle gourd's grade. This jade spring bottle gourd was a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. To be able to bestow upon me a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure is already very good. Qin Yu was very satisfied. The reason for that was because he knew that first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures were extremely rare in the entire divine realm. In the entire divine realm, the great majority of god-kings used second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures as their weapons. Back then, the craftsman god Cheho Yuan was bestowed the title of craftsman god, because he had refined a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. From this, one could tell how rare first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures were. Well then, you should be satisfied with obtaining this jade spring bottle gourd, right? The unfettered exalted celestial said with a light smile. You can leave now. With a flip of his hand, Qin Yu put away the jade spring bottle gourd. Then, he bowed and thanked the unfettered exalted celestial. Thank you, Senior Unfettered Exalted Celestial. The unfettered exalted celestial waved his hand and said, Go on. Qin Yu immediately bowed. Then he turned around and left. However, when Qin Yu reached the entrance of the garden, the unfettered exalted celestial said, Qin Yu, before you leave, let me remind you of one more thing. Qin Yu's body suddenly stopped. He turned around and looked to the unfettered exalted celestial. Senior Unfettered Exalted Celestial, please give me some pointers. The unfettered exalted celestial smiled and said, As I said earlier, my eldest senior brother is very concerned about this groom search. Thus, this time around it is not only me and my second senior brother. Even my eldest senior brother is on the surrounding islands of the Mountain Sea Palace. The Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial is on the surrounding islands of the Mountain Sea Palace. Qin Yu was greatly alarmed. Course. After all, my eldest senior brother is my eldest senior brother. If he wants to see you, you will naturally see him. If he does not wish to see you, even if you run through the surrounding 3,000+ islands, you will most likely not be able to see him. The unfettered exalted celestial said with a light smile. The reason I am reminding you is to let you know that there is no need to rush back. Stay here first. Who knows when you might run into the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial. If you run into him, then your luck will come to an end. Eldest senior brother is not as poor as me and second senior brother. Poor? Qin Yu did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, Qin Yu could also tell that to be able to run into the most mysterious Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial, it would be a wonderful thing. The treasures on the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial should be much more than the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial and the Unfettered Exalted Celestial. No wonder that Zhou Xian still stayed here after being bestowed by the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Qin Yu came to a realization. Senior Unfettered Exalted Celestial, thank you for your pointers. Qin Yu said gratefully. The Unfettered Exalted Celestial smiled. Then he disappeared from the garden. Qin Yu walked out of the unfettered palace and looked down. There was a group of people chatting in the surroundings of the Mountain Sea Palace. When Qin Yu walked out, this group of people all turned their gazes to Qin Yu. After walking down the flight of stairs, Qin Yu walked toward Duanmu Yu and the others. Brother Qin Yu, congratulations, congratulations. Qin Ho said with a loud laughter. Duanmu Yu and Shen Tufan also looked to Qin Yu with smiles on their faces. That Duanmu Yu asked with curiosity. Brother Qin Yu, did you manage to obtain a gift from the unfettered exalted celestial after meeting him? Immediately, the surrounding people all pricked up their ears. Zhou Xian stared at Qin Yu with a burning gaze. Qin Yu smiled lightly. With a flip of his hand, a bronze-colored bottle gourd appeared in his hand. The gazes of the dozen or so people in the surroundings were all focused on the bronze-colored bottle gourd. Grand Mist spiritual treasures possessed the special aura of Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Furthermore, weapons that were refined from Grand Mist spiritual treasures would rarely have the appearance of a bottle gourd. Bottle gourds were generally born from the world. As for gourds that were born from the world, they would normally be Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Duanmu Yu and the others with good eyesight already had their guesses. That Zhou Xian's expression grew even uglier. Brother Qin Yu, the unfettered exalted celestial, also bestowed a Grand Mist spiritual treasure to you? Qin Ho exclaimed. Precisely. Qin Yu nodded. Chapter 585. Hearing Qin Yu's acknowledgement, the surrounding people immediately exclaimed in surprise. Some of the people standing far away even began to discuss among themselves. Another person was bestowed a grand mist spiritual treasure by an exalted celestial. Hearing the discussions of the surrounding people in low voices, Zhou Xian grew even more displeased. That was because the majority of the people were standing on Qin Yu's side. Qin Yu had relied on his willpower and strength to ascend the heaven-connecting flight of steps. As for Zhou Xian, he had relied on his relationship with the Thunder Punishment, exalted celestial. That Zhou Xian is walking over, Duanmu said to Qin Yu in a soft voice. Qin Yu turned around to look. The distant Zhou Xian was walking over. Qin Yu wanted to know what this Zhou Xian was planning to do. After approaching Qin Yu, Zhou Xian revealed a smile. With a chuckle he said, "Brother Qin Yu, congratulations. I truly never expected that Brother Qin Yu would be able to create an unprecedented record in the divine realm, and directly ascend to the highest step of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Furthermore, because of that, you were received by the unfettered exalted celestial and bestowed a grand mist spiritual treasure. I, Zhou Xian, truly admire Brother Qin Yu from the bottom of my heart." Qin Yu was slightly startled. Soon after, he nodded and smiled. Why would this Zhou Xian instead come to compliment me? Qin Yu was puzzled. Qin Yu did not believe that this Zhou Xian would truly admire him so sincerely. Zhou Xian continued, "Brother Qin Yu has already received a gift from the unfettered exalted celestial. Are you going to continue to stay or return?" Qin Yu came to a sudden realization. This Zhou Xian's most fundamental purpose was this matter. Evidently, this Zhou Xian already knew that the floating feathers exalted celestial was on a certain nearby island. Thus, Zhou Xian wished for Qin Yu to leave as soon as possible. Qin Yu had an appearance of being startled awake. He then looked to Duanmu and the others and said, "Brother Duanmu, Brother Quan, Brother Shintu, earlier, when I was meeting with the unfettered exalted celestial, the exalted celestial told me something." "What is it?" Quan Ho, Duanmu, Shintu Fan and the others all looked at Qin Yu. Who wouldn't want to listen to what an Empyrean said? The unfettered exalted celestial said that it is not only the unfettered exalted celestial and the thunder punishment exalted celestial that are in the vicinity. Even the floating feathers exalted celestial is on the 3,000+ islands surrounding the mountain sea palace. Immediately, the eyes of the surrounding people lit up. If everyone's luck is good and you run into Empyrean Flutterfeather, that would be a great blessing. Qin Yu sighed. Then, Qin Yu looked at Zhou Xian and said with good intentions, "Brother Zhou Xian, don't be in a hurry to go back and waste this opportunity. Who knows, you might encounter Empyrean Flutterfeathers." Zhou Xian's eye muscles trembled, but he still squeezed out a smile. Thank you, Brother Qin Yu, for your guidance." Zhou Xian felt hatred in his heart. "Qin Yu, even if you received guidance from the unfettered exalted celestial, there is no need to say it out loud." This was because the participants of the groom search were all gathered on the floating island. None of them went to the other 3,000+ islands to stroll around. However, after obtaining this news, it was likely that the majority of the people would head to the other islands to search for the floating feathers exalted celestial. In the beginning, Zhou Xian had also planned to wait for a year or two before pretending to be bored and go to the other islands to stroll around. No need to thank me. I ought to let everyone know about this matter," Qin Yu said with a smile. "Thank you, Brother Qin Yu," Duanmu said solemnly. The others all knew how precious this information was. Thus, they were all grateful to Qin Yu for being able to tell them this secret. "Brother Duanmu, you all should not hold too much hope. What sort of character is the floating feathers exalted celestial? If he wishes to meet you, you will naturally be able to meet him. If he does not wish to meet you, even if you run through the 3,000+ islands, you will likely not be able to meet him," Qin Yu said. Quan Ho said, "Qin Yu, we naturally know about this matter. However, by telling us about this matter, we at least have a trace of hope in our hearts." "Who?" At this moment, two figures directly flew through the sky. Qin Yu knew with a single glance that these two people were most definitely planning to find the floating feathers exalted celestial. It would appear that there are people who are unable to wait, Duanmuyu said with a light smile. With 2 people setting off, even more people were unable to restrain themselves. One person after another soared into the sky and left the levitation island. Zhou Xian was also unable to restrain himself. He lightly nodded at Qin Yu and them, then soared into the sky and left. Brother Qin Yu, shall we set off as well? Qin Ho said. Sure. Qin Yu, Duanmuyu, Quen Ho and Shen Tufan soared into the sky together, and began their journey to search for the floating feathers exalted celestial on the thousands of islands surrounding the mountain sea palace. Time passed. In the beginning, Qin Yu and the others were still together. Later on they all separated. Every single one of the 3,000+ islands was not small. To search through all of them would require a very long period of time. In a blink of an eye, 3 years passed. During these 3 years, the 18 people participating in the groom search had already searched through the 3,000+ islands multiple times. However, not a single person was able to find the floating feathers exalted celestial. Or perhaps someone had encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial but did not announce it. A stream was gurgling. Qin Yu was quietly walking beside the stream. As he looked at the beautiful sea of flowers beside the stream, he felt a burst of joy in his heart. If the floating feathers exalted celestial does not wish to see me, I will not be able to see him no matter how hard I try. Qin Yu sighed. Seeing a small patch of green grass before him, Qin Yu walked over and casually laid down. Qin Yu was not in a rush. At the very least, he had obtained a grand mist spiritual treasure. Merely, I wonder if my jade spring gourd or Zhou Xian's black scepter is better. Qin Yu did not have certainty in his heart. Qin Yu clearly remembered. The unfettered exalted celestial had said that the floating feathers exalted celestial was not as poor as him and the thunder punishment exalted celestial. Brother Qin Yu, what a coincidence. Hearing a voice, Qin Yu propped himself up with one hand. Looking toward the direction of the voice, he saw that the person who had come was Duanmuyu. Brother Duanmu, have you encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial? Duanmuyu walked over to Qin Yu's side and sat down. Haha, this floating feathers exalted celestial is not someone that one can meet just because they say so. Qin Yu immediately understood that Duanmuyu had not encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial either. Duanmuyu still had a light smile on his face. Being able to meet the floating feathers exalted celestial is already a blessing. Not being able to meet him is a very normal thing. Come, Brother Qin Yu, let us drink a few cups. How about it? With a flip of his hand, a wine jug and wine cups appeared on the grass. Qin Yu was immediately in the mood to drink. Thus, the two of them began to chat, laugh, and drink to their heart's content on the grass. To the experts of the divine realm, time was simply meaningless. Qin Yu and Duanmuyu continued to drink. They drank for over 6 days without stopping. After drinking for over 6 days, the two of them were slightly intoxicated as they spoke. Duanmu, there is a matter that I have wanted to ask you the entire time. However, it is difficult for me to ask you about it. Qin Yu's eyes were somewhat hazy. What is it? Go ahead and ask away. At this moment, Duanmuyu revealed a rarely seen heroic spirit. Thinking of this matter, Qin Yu's mind became a bit clearer. Brother Duanmu, I have heard of your exceptional love before. Do you know? Bullshit. What exceptional love? Duanmuyu frowned and cursed out. Seemingly realizing that his current state of mind was not right, Duanmuyu smiled at Qin Yu. Brother Qin Yu, my apologies. However, the majority of the people in the divine realm consider that to be an exceptional love. It is a laughable matter. That is merely a very ordinary relationship. I liked that woman. That woman was very ordinary and very ordinary. I was very noble. However, in the end that woman dumped me. It was that simple. Duanmuyu had a bitter smile on his face. Then he grabbed the wine jug and fiercely gulped it down. Qin Yu did not say anything. Qin Yu was able to guess that the matter was most definitely not as simple as Duanmuyu described it to be. Sometimes I used to hate her. However, sometimes I also hate myself. Actually, from the way I see it now, love. Haha, is there love? It is merely a sort of attraction between men and women. Duanmu Yu's tone contained a trace of arrogance. Sure enough, it is as the legends say. This Duanmu Yu does not believe in love. Qin Yu nodded in his heart. However, according to Qin Yu's understanding of Duanmu Yu's temperament, Duanmu Yu was indeed a very perfect man. However, why would that woman leave him? Duanmu Yu did not say anything else. He continued to drink and drink. After 2 entire hours passed, Duanmu Yu stared at Qin Yu. Qin Yu, I ask you, if you like a woman, you can do everything for her. However, she heartlessly left you. You gave her good weapons, you gave her spirit medicines, you helped her with her cultivation. However, regardless of what you did, she was not moved. Instead, she felt that it was only right. So much so that in the end she left you. However, when she came to her senses one day and came to find you again, would you be able to accept her? Qin Yu was slightly startled. Is there such a woman? Qin Yu asked in confusion. One should know how to be satisfied to know how to be grateful. To treat her so well, how could she not feel anything? There is. Duanmu Yu's voice was very low. When I separated from her, I suddenly realized that I must have spoiled her too much. I only knew that I must try my best to make her happy. However, in the end I still failed. My imperial father had told me that a woman like her was not worth it. However, my heart was with her. What should I do? There was a trace of grief in Duanmu Yu's eyes. I believed that a man would only be able to truly feel his heart once. When that one time fails, his heart will shatter, and he will no longer have true feelings. Thus, after she left me and experienced true suffering, she came to her senses and came to find me again. I did not agree to her. I told her that when she left me, my heart had already shattered. With my heart shattered, would I still have love? Duanmu Yu closed his eyes. Tears were flickering on his eyelashes. Come Qin Yu, let's drink. Duanmu Yu grabbed another wine jug. Qin Yu immediately raised his wine jug to accompany Duanmu Yu in drinking. However, Qin Yu was sighing for Duanmu Yu in his heart. Half a month later, Qin Yu and Duanmu Yu separated again. The two of them were searching for the floating feathers exalted celestial on the 3,000+ islands. Merely, after separating this time around, the feelings between the two of them had clearly grown much deeper. When a person was capable of telling another person the secret in their heart, the relationship between the two of them would be very close. Fortunately, the person I encountered was Li Er, and not that lover of Duanmu Yu. Qin Yu sighed in his heart. If one were to fall in love with that sort of woman, it would indeed be a painful thing. Floating feathers exalted celestial. Exactly where is this floating feathers exalted celestial? Qin Yu also spread out his spatial energy to search carefully. However, regardless of how Qin Yu searched, he was unable to find the existence of the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu was flying in the sky. His gaze was casually looking all over the place below him. He flew away from an island, flew past the sea, entered another island and continued to search. This sort of life continued. Another 2 years passed. Not a single one of the 18 people participating in the groom search gave up. As experts of the divine realm, everyone's patience was extraordinarily good. Everyone was carefully searching for the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu landed in a forest on the island. He was walking through the forest. Qin Yu was suddenly startled. Qin Yu was constantly spreading out his spatial energy. The spatial energy that he spread out covered a range of several hundred miles. An instant ago there was no one present. However, at this moment, a person appeared 100 meters before him. Teleportation suddenly appeared. This person is actually capable of teleportation. That person is at least a god king. Qin Yu became agitated in his heart at once. Who knows, this person might possibly be the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu forcefully suppressed his agitation. Qin Yu did not walk in a straight line and went to meet this person directly. Instead, he had a casual look. Strolling leisurely, he headed towards that direction very naturally. However, that person actually walked over towards Qin Yu. In a blink of an eye, that person appeared within Qin Yu's field of vision. The person who came was a handsome and cold young man. He was dressed in a black robe with golden edges. That head of silver hair reached his waist. This silver-haired young man even had a pair of silver eyes. Furthermore, behind his head, there were 3 long black horns that resembled a feather crown. This silver-haired, silver-eyed young man with 3 black horns was as cold as 10,000 years old ice. However, at this moment, there was a trace of a smile on his face. Like the spring wind and rain, he opened his mouth and said, "Qin Yu, hello." "Cello." Qin Yu replied in a daze. The person in front of him seemed to have come to find him. Master said that Brother Qin Yu is about to get married. Therefore, he ordered me to send 3 gifts to congratulate you. With a flip of his hand, 3 items appeared out of thin air. A red bead, a black battle blade that had a blood-red glow circulating on its surface, and a gorgeous feather robe that was flashing with a purple glow. Chapter 586. 3 Gifts as a Congratulatory Gift. Qin Yu's gaze was focused on the 3 items. His spatial energy naturally enveloped the 3 items. Qin Yu was able to clearly sense the unique aura of the Grand Mist's spiritual treasures. Qin Yu felt his breathing stop. 3 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. In the blink of an eye, Qin Yu became clear-headed. However, he was also puzzled in his heart. This silver-haired, silver-eyed man said that his master is giving me these 3 gifts as a congratulatory gift. He even said that I am about to get married. His master is so certain that I will definitely win in the groom search. Furthermore, I don't seem to know such a powerful person. They were neither relatives nor friends. They didn't know each other at all. Yet, his master was giving him 3 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. The silver-haired, silver-eyed young man's gaze was fixed on Qin Yu. Then, with a light smile on his face, he pointed at the 3 items and said, "This red bead is the Fire Origin Spiritual Pearl. The Fire Origin Spiritual Pearl's effect is incomparably unique. Brother Qin Yu, after you drip your blood on it, you will know its remarkable abilities. This is something that my master is giving to Brother Qin Yu's future child to use." Qin Yu couldn't help but be stunned. Giving him his child. He wasn't even married yet. This silver-haired, silver-eyed young man's master was truly thinking far ahead. The silver-haired, silver-eyed young man pointed at the 2nd item. It was a black battle blade with a blood-red radiance circulating on its surface. This battle blade is called the Gauze Feather Blade. Of course, Qin Yu, I'm afraid that you will not need to use this spiritual treasure. As for this spiritual treasure, Qin Yu, you can give it to your future wife to use. You can also give it to your other relatives to use. Qin Yu could only stand to the side and listen. The silver-haired, silver-eyed young man pointed at the 3rd item. This feather garment is something that my master personally refined not long ago for Qin Yu's wedding. It is called the Purple Rain Feather Garment. As long as your wife wears this Purple Rain Feather Garment, there will not be many people in the entire divine realm who will be able to harm her. Qin Yu's entire spirit is in a state of excitement. Purple Rain Feather Garment, a defensive spiritual treasure. Until now, Qin Yu had never seen such a defensive spiritual treasure. Not only was the effect good, but the craftsmanship was also perfect. What are the levels of these 3 spiritual treasures? Qin Yu thought to himself. It was very difficult to tell the level of these 3 spirit treasures just by looking at their appearance. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed the excitement in his heart. At this moment there was a very important question. Who gave him this gift? What was the point of accepting a gift without figuring out who gave it to him? I am Qin Yu. May I know who your master is? Qin Yu looked at the silver-haired, silver-eyed young man. The The silver-haired, silver-eyed youngster smiled faintly. Qin Yu, you don't need to ask about my master's identity. When your strength reaches a certain level, you will naturally know. Naturally, I will also know about the relationship between you and my master. The relationship between me and your master. Qin Yu was at a loss. In Qin Yu's mind, the only super expert that was related to him was Uncle Lon. However, this silver-haired, silver-eyed youngster before him, Qin Yu, was unable to see through him. He was at least a god king. The master of such a person was likely to be much more powerful than Uncle Lon. Did he know such a person? I've completed my mission. Farewell. The silver-haired, silver-eyed youngster bowed slightly. Then, he disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only 3 items that were floating in midair. He left just like that. Qin Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't leave behind his name. He didn't even leave behind any information. He just placed the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures before him. Seeing the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures floating in midair, Qin Yu smiled and sighed. I can't just leave them here. With a wave of his hand, the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures arrived before Qin Yu. What are the grades of these 3 grand mist spiritual treasures? Qin Yu felt an itch in his heart. Immediately, 3 drops of blood flew toward the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures and fused with them. Dripping blood on the grand mist spiritual treasures could be considered as the most preliminary refinement. After doing this, Chu Feng was at least clear about the information regarding the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures. However, after knowing the information regarding the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures, Qin Yu felt as if he was struck by lightning. He stood there stupidly. This. In the entire divine realm, the 8 great sage emperors possessed inherited spiritual treasures. The grand mist spiritual treasures of the 8 great sage emperors were first-rate spiritual treasures. As for the other God King level experts, the majority of them used second-rate spiritual treasures as weapons. Only 2 or 3 of them, such as the Azura God King, had obtained a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure refined by the craftsman god Cheho Yuan. However now, 3. Qin Yu felt his heart beating. It was as if heavenly thunder was rumbling beside his ears. At this moment, Qin Yu felt his mind rumbling unceasingly. His thinking speed was extremely slow. First-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. All 3 of them are first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Qin Yu swallowed heavily. His facial expression was also stiff. After a long time, Qin Yu gradually recovered his ability to think normally. Huff, huff. Qin Yu gasped for breath. His gaze was firmly fixed on the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures before him. They are actually all first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures, 3 of them. Qin Yu felt that his palms were burning. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. This was too shocking. If it were 3 second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures, Qin Yu would be extremely excited. However, 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. As such, Qin Yu was not excited. Instead, he was terrified. One must know that there were only about 10 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures in the entire divine realm. Among them, the 8 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures of the 8 great sage emperors had existed since the birth of the divine realm. After Cheho Yuan refined a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure, he was immediately conferred the title of craftsman god. Cheho Yuan gifted that first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure to the Azura God King and obtained the protection of the Azura God King. No one dared to provoke him. It could be said that the birth of a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure would shake the entire divine realm. However, at this moment, on a small island in the vicinity of the Mountain Sea Palace, Qin Yu had obtained 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Furthermore, they were given to him by others in the name of congratulating him on his marriage. Qin Yu suddenly absorbed the 3 grand mist spiritual treasures into his body. 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. No matter what, I cannot let those god kings of the divine realm know about it. If they were to know about it, they would likely kill me and snatch my treasures. Qin Yu did not dare to imagine what sort of scene those god kings would have if they knew that he possessed 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. After all, other than the exalted celestials' spiritual treasures that only exalted celestials possessed, the most precious first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures would be them. After absorbing the 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures into his body, Qin Yu calmed down. As he calmly pondered over this matter, Qin Yu came up with a plan. At the same time, he also had a guess as to who had gifted him those gifts. To be able to gift 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures at once, even the unfettered exalted celestial would not be able to do that. Qin Yu clearly remembered the words of the unfettered exalted celestial. The unfettered exalted celestial had clearly said that his eldest senior brother was not as poor as him and his second senior brother. To be able to gift 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures at once, that person is indeed very wealthy. A smile appeared on Qin Yu's face. This matter is 100% related to that mysterious floating feathers exalted celestial. If that silver-haired silver-eyed youngster is a god king, then his master should be the floating feathers exalted celestial. If that silver-haired silver-eyed youngster is an exalted celestial, then he can only be the floating feathers exalted celestial. As for his master, when Qin Yu thought of this, he did not dare to think about it anymore. The floating feathers exalted celestial was already the strongest among the 3 exalted celestials. Did he have another exalted celestial? I hope that I am only imagining things. Qin Yu laughed at himself. The main reason was that he was unable to determine the identity and strength of that silver-haired silver-eyed youngster. If he knew the strength of that silver-haired silver-eyed youngster, he would be able to guess who the person behind him was. No matter what, this matter is most definitely related to the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu smiled confidently. When we arrive at the floating snow city, I can completely say that I have obtained the gifts bestowed by the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu made his decision in his heart. I will take out that jade spring gourd first. If I can win a spot with just the jade spring gourd, that would be great. If that doesn't work, then I will take out another first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. Qin Yu was very confident. Qin Yu did not believe that a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure would be unable to defeat Zhou Xian. After obtaining these 3 first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures, Qin Yu was naturally filled with confidence. In the following days, Qin Yu leisurely toured the surrounding islands of the Mountain Sea Palace. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, Qin Yu and the others had been in the Mountain Sea Palace for close to 9 years. Qin Yu was flying above the ocean. His black gown was fluttering in the wind. He had a smile on his face. The master of that silver-haired silver-eyed youngster is truly generous. Once this fire origin spiritual pearl fuses with one's body, it will become a god king. It will be extremely easy for one to reach the god king realm. Fire origin spiritual pearl was a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. It was a spiritual pearl born from the origin of flames in the entire universe. If it was refined after fusing with one's body, one would be able to easily control flames of all levels. Furthermore, one would be able to easily fuse with the origin of flames and comprehend the laws of the universe very easily. This is indeed the best gift for my future child. Qin Yu was very happy. He was already looking forward to his child with Li'er. As for the purple rain clothes, they were both first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Once one refined them and wore them, it would be extremely difficult for even god kings to kill the person wearing the purple rain clothes. Giving it to Li'er is also the most perfect gift. Qin Yu was unable to contain his joy. As Qin Yu was thinking about things, in a short moment, he had arrived in the airspace above the levitation island. At this moment, there were already many people on the floating island. The people participating in the groom search had been painstakingly searching for the floating feathers exalted celestial in the past few years. However, other than Qin Yu, None of them had encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial. If the floating feathers exalted celestial wanted to meet someone, he would definitely meet them. If he did not meet them, no matter how hard those people tried, they would not be able to find him. Qin Yu descended below the mountain sea palace. At this moment, Quan Ho and Shen Tufan were already there. Including Qin Yu, there were a total of 11 people surrounding the mountain sea palace. Heavenly Wolf Palace Master, how have you been all these years? Have you found the floating feathers exalted celestial? Far away from Qin Yu, 3 people were chatting with each other. Don't talk about it. I haven't relaxed for a moment all these years. However, Sai, forget about it. The floating feathers exalted celestial is not someone that one can meet whenever one wants to. Heavenly Wolf Palace Master sighed helplessly. Another person consoled him. Heavenly Wolf Palace Master, it is not only you. None of us brothers have encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial. It would appear that the first chosen candidate is either Grandmaster Qin Yu or that Zhou Xian. The Heavenly Wolf Palace Master nodded. However, I support Grandmaster Qin Yu. Grandmaster Qin Yu has relied on perseverance and ability to reach the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. You did not see it, but in the past half-year, I have seen Sect Master Qin Yu being blasted down from the heaven-connecting flight of steps countless times. At this moment, the majority of the people in the surroundings were discussing the floating feathers exalted celestial or the groom search. Qin Yu, you've also returned, Ke Ho said with a smile. I've also returned to the Mountain Sea Palace half a month ago. Did you not encounter the floating feathers exalted celestial either? Don't mind it. Even now, I have yet to hear of anyone among the 18 that managed to encounter the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu smiled lightly. This Ke Ho thought that he had not encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial before he even mentioned it. He did not dare to be certain as to whether or not he had encountered the floating feathers exalted celestial. However, he had obtained 3 gifts. Big brother Duanmu has also come, Shen Tufan suddenly said. Qin Yu and Ke Ho looked toward the direction Shen Tufan pointed to. Duanmu Yu was currently flying over. Upon seeing Qin Yu and the others, Duanmu Yu directly flew over to Qin Yu and the others. After Duanmu Yu landed, Ke Ho immediately asked, Brother Duanmu, did you encounter the floating feathers exalted celestial? Duanmu Yu lightly smiled and shook his head. I did not encounter him. What about the rest of you? Duanmu Yu looked to Qin Yu and the others. Ke Ho and Shen Tufan both shook their heads. As for Qin Yu, he merely smiled. Qin Yu was truly at a loss as to what to say. After all, he himself did not know the identity of that silver-haired, silver-eyed youngster. Seeing Qin Yu smiling, Duanmu Yu thought that Qin Yu had not encountered him either. Everyone, I reckon that there is no use for us to continue to stay here. Furthermore, the time limit of 10 years set by the utmost North Sage Emperor is approaching. Should we return now? Duanmu Yu looked to the crowd and suggested. Qin Yu, Ke Ho, Shen Tufan and the others glanced at one another. They all nodded in agreement. After that, Qin Yu and the others directly flew away from the levitation island and began to fly toward the land of the divine realm. Chapter 587. Snowflakes swirled in the air. Stepping on the simple and unadorned black stone road of the utmost northern region's floating snow city, Qin Yu, Shen Tufan, Quan Ho and Duanmu Yu bid their farewells and separated. I finally returned. Qin Yu had a smile on his face. When he obtained those 3 first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, Qin Yu was certain that the first chosen candidate spot for the groom search would be in his hands. Qin Yu naturally felt a burst of relaxation in his heart. He walked to the entrance of the wood mansion. Uncle Lon and Li Er ought to be inside, right? Qin Yu thought to himself as he stood before the entrance of the wood mansion. However, right at this moment, Little Yu, come on in. Zhang Lan's voice directly sounded in Qin Yu's mind. The remarkable abilities of God Kings are truly extraordinary. Qin Yu gasped in his heart. He then directly walked toward the entrance of the wood mansion. The two guards of the wood mansion ought to have received orders from Jiang Lan. Thus they did not stop Qin Yu. Uncle Lan and Li Er are in the innermost courtyard. Qin Yu knew very well that the first reason was because Qin Yu's spatial energy had covered the entire wood mansion. The second reason was because of Lu Xing's tear, Qin Yu was able to sense Li Er's location. He walked through the corridors in a very familiar manner. After a short moment, he arrived at the innermost courtyard. Li Er had been standing at the entrance of the courtyard the entire time. When she saw Qin Yu, she immediately ran toward Qin Yu in an extremely joyous manner. Qin Yu also directly hugged Li Er. Uncle Lan also walked out from the innermost courtyard. When he saw Qin Yu and Li Er hugging each other, he was unable to refrain himself from smiling. Well then, Uncle Lan is watching. Qin Yu whispered in Li Er's ear. Li Er blushed slightly before letting go of Qin Yu. However, she still held onto Qin Yu's hand. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu and said with a smile, "Little Yu, how was it? Are you confident about getting the first spot?" Qin Yu's face was full of smiles. "Yes, I'm very confident." 10. Jiang Lan smiled so much that his mouth was crooked. "Little Yu, do not try to fool me. I have heard that Zhou Xian had received a gift from the Thunder Punishment, Exalted Celestial." Qin Yu smiled confidently. "Uncle Lan, when the time comes for everyone to gather at the Sage Emperor's palace, just wait and see. The first spot will definitely belong to me." "You're still keeping it a secret from me?" Jiang Lan laughed. Qin Yu also chuckled. "All right, since you're so confident, I'm relieved. Now, this old man will not disturb the two of you." Jiang Lan deliberately said those words and then left. After Jiang Lan left, Qin Yu and Li Er began to be intimate with each other. After a long time, Li Er was lying on Qin Yu's bosom. She raised her head and asked in a low voice, "Big brother Qin Yu, are you truly confident in obtaining the first spot? I have heard that Zhou Xian had obtained a grand mist spiritual treasure." Qin Yu lightly smiled. He scratched Li Er's straight little nose. "Rest assured, he had obtained a gift from the Thunder Punishment, Exalted Celestial. However, I have obtained a gift from the Unfettered Exalted Celestial and the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial." 2 Exalted Celestials. Then wouldn't the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial be? Li Er opened her eyes wide in shock. "Although I am unable to ascertain the identity of that silver-haired, silver-eyed man, that gift is definitely related to the Floating Feathers Exalted Celestial." Qin Yu lightly smiled. "Well then, you can rest assured. The time he spent with Li Er always passed very quickly." When Qin Yu left the wood mansion, he had already stayed in the wood mansion for 3 entire days. After returning to the floating cloud mansion, Qin Yu discovered that Uncle Fu, Qiuzhong Fu and the others were already anxiously waiting for him. When Qin Yu returned to the floating snow city, Uncle Fu and the others already knew about it. After all, they were able to sense Qin Yu's location and had already prepared a sumptuous banquet. However, they waited for 3 days before Qin Yu returned from the wood mansion. Qin Yu spent his days in the floating cloud mansion very comfortably. He was merely waiting for the day when they would gather at the Sage Emperor's palace. In the garden. There's still 18 more days before the Sage Emperor's palace determines who the first spot belongs to, Qin Yu said in a low voice. He then picked up the wine jug on the table beside him and drank a mouthful of wine. At this moment, a heavenly deity maid walked over from afar. "Your lordship, Princess Zhang Yan requests an audience." "Oh, have them come here directly," Qin Yu promptly said. For Zhang Yan to come here, could it be that she also wanted to find out if he had the confidence to obtain a spot? During this period of time, there had been many people who had come to find out his strength. Among them, a portion of them had been instructed by Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian did not know that Qin Yu had obtained 3 first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. However, Zhou Xian knew that Qin Yu had been bestowed upon him by the unfettered exalted celestial. Zhou Xian also did not know if his black scepter was comparable to Qin Yu's bottle gourd. Big brother Qin Yu. Jiang Yan came alone. Yan, is something the matter? Qin Yu said with a smile. Seeing Jiang Yan's expression, Qin Yu was certain that Jiang Yan was definitely happy about something. Jiang Yan said happily, Big brother Qin Yu, Big brother Luoyu has ascended. Jiang Yan said excitedly. Luoyu. Jun Luoyu. Qin Yu was slightly startled. Jiang Yan nodded repeatedly. That's right. I have always been paying attention to him. 2 years ago he had just ascended. I even met him. Qin Yu was also very happy in his heart. How did Luoyu react when you met him? Qin Yu was looking forward to Jun Luoyu's reaction. In Jun Luoyu's eyes, Jiang Yan was merely an immortal emperor with a lower strength. However, after Jun Luoyu arrived in the divine realm, he suddenly discovered Jiang Yan's true identity. Then Jiang Yan smiled complacently. Hee, it's alright. Big brother Luoyu was very shocked at the beginning. However, his ability to accept things was quite strong. Also because of me, Big brother Luoyu was spared from 1,000 years of hard labor as a miner. Jiang Yan said complacently. I have returned to Floating Snow City for a period of time. You only came to my place today. Have you been at Luoyu's place all this time? Qin Yu asked. Jiang Yan nodded happily. That's right. He is at Luanshan City under Floating Snow City. That Qi Qing is also there. Qi Qing, Saiyan Emperor. Qin Yu's eyes shined. Jiang Yan nodded and said. That's right. That Saiyan Emperor's strength is pretty good. When he had just ascended to the divine realm, he was already a peak mid-level deity. Now he is even a high-level deity. However, before reaching the heavenly deity level, it would be difficult for Granny to bring that Qi Qing to the Floating Snow City. Qin Yu suddenly understood. No wonder he had never seen the Saiyan Emperor in all these years in the Floating Snow City. Qin Yu couldn't help but sigh in his heart. That Saiyan Emperor was truly valiant. After staying in the immortal devil and demon realm for so long, his soul had already reached the Soul Jin Dan. No wonder he was able to easily take care of Peng Demon Emperor and them during his tribulation. Big brother Qin Yu, do you have confidence in obtaining the first chosen candidate spot for my big sister's groom search? Jiang Yan pushed Qin Yu's arm and asked. Qin Yu grinned. Is there even a need to ask? Today, the utmost northern region's Floating Snow City's Sage Emperor's palace was once again bustling with noise and excitement. The 18 candidates were all gathered in the Sage Emperor's palace. The 13 God Kings were also sitting high above in the Sage Emperor's palace. The entire palace was filled with unceasing chatter and laughter. Qin Yu, this time around, the chosen candidate spot will be fought over by you and Zhou Xian, Kun Ho said with a smile. Qin Yu and Zhou Xian glanced at each other. The two of them both had a confident expression on their faces. Suddenly, Qin Yu, Zhou Xian, Duanmu Yu and everyone else looked up. At this moment, the utmost North Sage Emperor Zhang Fan stood up with a smile on his face. Immediately, the people below grew completely quiet. Seeing that everyone below had quieted down, Zhang Fan smiled and said, Everyone, the 10 days have passed. Ladies and gentlemen, the 10-year period is up. The first candidate for my daughter's public betrothal will soon be confirmed. And now, it is time for the 18 candidates to display their gifts. Zhang Fan's gaze swept through the 18 people below. At this moment, Zhou Xian's father, the Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua, laughed and said, Brother Zhang, there is no need for you to go through all that trouble. As far as I know, only that Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman Qin Yu and my son Zhou Xian have received gifts bestowed by the exalted celestials in this trip to the Mountain Sea Palace. It's fine to have the two of them display their gifts directly. Zhang Fan merely smiled and nodded. That Zhou Xian was the first to stand up. He then walked to the center of the palace and respectfully bowed to the 13 god kings above. Only then did he say, "Uncle, this gift that I have received is the sulfur flame rui bestowed upon me by the thunder punishment exalted celestial. This sulfur flame rui is a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure." The 13 god kings above all slightly nodded. Zhang Fan's wife, Chunyu Ro, nodded and said, "This sulfur flame rui is firstly a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. Secondly, this rui originally contained a joyous intent. To use it as a gift in the groom search is also extremely appropriate." Ho Fei, who stood behind the Azura god king, winked at Qin Yu. Qin Yu was not worried. However, Ho Fei was worried for Qin Yu. Qin Yu slightly smiled to Ho Fei. He used his gaze to indicate to Ho Fei to be at ease. At this moment, the Azura god king suddenly opened his mouth and said, "This Zhou Xian's gift is indeed pretty good. However, let's take a look at Qin Yu's gift." That Zhang Fan was also very concerned about Qin Yu, the Grandmaster artifact craftsman. Immediately he laughed and said, "I have also heard that Qin Yu had ascended to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps. Because of that, he received a gift bestowed upon him by the unfettered exalted celestial. Ascending to the top of the heaven-connecting flight of steps without being a god king." Immediately, the various god kings above all looked to Qin Yu with a different gaze. The people beside them were all discussing this through voice transmission. "Qin Yu, show us your gift." Zhang Fan looked to Qin Yu with a smile. Immediately, everyone's gazes were cast toward Qin Yu. Qin Yu also greeted Zhang Fan with a smile on his face. Zhang Fan was his future father-in-law. How could he be lacking in manners? Qin Yu stood up with a smile on his face. He then walked to the center of the palace hall and stood side by side with Zhou Xian. Before Qin Yu could say anything, that Zhou Xian said to Qin Yu, "Brother Qin Yu, you've received a gift bestowed upon you by the unfettered exalted celestial. What sort of treasure did the unfettered exalted celestial bestow upon you? Take it out and let us have a look." Qin Yu was also not in a rush. With a flip of his hand, he took out the jade spring gourd. When the various god kings on the stage saw this bronze-colored gourd, they were all able to sense the special grand mist spiritual treasure aura of the jade spring gourd. Qin Yu smiled and said, "This is the jade spring gourd. The jade spring gourd is also a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. The gourd is capable of shooting out jade spring water to attack and bind." Hearing that Qin Yu's item was also a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure, Zhou Xian instead started to smile. Both second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Then whose is better? Zhang Fan said with a smile. According to the rules from back then, the 13 god kings will be the judges. Between the two of them, whoever has the most god kings supporting them will be the winner. Chunyu Ro instead said with a smile, "Although the two of them are both second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures, I believe that this jade spring gourd should be slightly better. Unfortunately, I do not possess the authority to judge." Qin Yu took a glance at Chunyu Ro. This future mother-in-law of mine seems to be supporting Zhou Xian. Qin Yu had a smile on his face. It's unlikely for him to win by relying on this jade spring gourd. Can only. At this moment, the god kings above were all preparing to judge. Wait a moment. Qin Yu's voice resounded through the entire palace hall. It caused all of the god kings to stop and look to Qin Yu. Zhou Xian frowned. He said, "Brother Qin Yu, the god kings are currently preparing to judge. How could you disturb the god king's judgment?" "Qin Yu, if you have something to say, please speak," Zhang Fan said with a smile. Qin Yu was after all a Grandmaster artifact craftsman. Thus he possessed the authority to speak. Qin Yu looked to the 13 god kings above. With a clear voice he said, "God kings, I did not say that my gift is this jade spring gourd. There is no need for you all to compare it with that sulfur flame jade spring gourd. Not this jade spring gourd." The majority of the people in the palace hall were confused. Qin Yu said with a smile. Earlier, Brother Zhou Xian wanted me to take out the gift bestowed by the unfettered exalted celestial for everyone to see. Thus I took it out. However, this does not mean that my gift is this jade spring gourd. May I ask, Brother Qin Yu, what is your gift? One must know that this gift must be bestowed by an exalted celestial. O Xian said. Course I know that. Qin Yu shot a glance at Zhou Xian. He then looked to the 13 god kings above. My gift is not the jade spring gourd bestowed by the unfettered exalted celestial. Instead, it is the gauze feather blade bestowed by the floating feathers exalted celestial. Qin Yu directly put away the jade spring gourd. At the same time, a black battle blade with a crimson light circulating through its surface appeared before him. Floating feathers exalted celestial. Zhou Xian's expression took a huge change. The heavenly deities in the palace hall were all shocked. Even the 13 god kings above were stunned. The strongest and most mysterious floating feathers exalted celestial among the 3 great exalted celestials. Qin Yu continued to speak with a clear voice. This blade is called gauze feather. It is a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. The gift to express my sincerity is this gauze feather blade. Bestowed by the floating feathers exalted celestial. First-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. The entire utmost North Sage Emperor's palace was silent. Only Qin Yu's voice was echoing in the palace hall. You're tuning in to the Whispers of Romance YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.